I never imagined my life would spiral into this abyss. But here I am, staring into the eyes of a woman who holds the keys to secrets that could destroy us all. I thought I was here to collect evidence, but the truth is, I'm the one on trial. The moment she opened that door, I knew I had stepped into something far darker than I ever anticipated. Every word she speaks feels like a blade, cutting through the thin veil of decency I thought I had. But as the walls close in, I realize she's not just guarding documents. She's guarding the last remnants of my sanity. The Latham Inn was a simple, quiet place where you could escape any awkward run-ins with family, friends, or coworkers. They had karaoke one night a week and trivia on another, but most of the time it was just dark and private. The inn also featured a small band on the first and third Fridays of each month. It was a nice, quiet place to eat dinner and dance a little, making it perfect for Susan to spend time with her boyfriend without making her husband feel bad. This was the kind of caring person Susan was. She might be unfaithful, but she would never want to hurt or embarrass anyone. After all, she loved her husband. He was the kind and thoughtful man that a wise woman needed. She was Susan DeVoe Singleton, the wife of Stephen Fitzgerald, and the younger sister of the DeVoe Singleton family. She had the beautiful looks that the New York press admired for many years. Some said they were graceful, while others called them classic beauty. However, some of the more casual photographers used words like attractive and stunning. The DeVoe women were seen more on page 3 in swimsuits than in the social section. Among all the DeVoe heiresses, Catherine DeVoe, married to Joseph Singleton, stood out as the most interesting and the wealthiest. Her daughters were the prettiest and the luckiest because their father's successful insurance business added to their wealth. In every way, they were fortunate, but they had one small problem. The Singleton sisters were known for their looks and their family's special reputation. This reputation was partly because of their father from the Singleton family. Susan and her sister accepted all that came with their family name, but they made sure to be good wives to their husbands. Susan thought that a married woman with a kind husband should be careful about how she acted. People liked to gossip, and keeping a good image was important. Susan knew the ropes. She worked in public relations and was a top partner at Kopf and Bradley. Right now, she was in charge of the Albany office, but most of her business still happened in the big city down south. Manhattan was still her main focus. At this moment, her biggest goal was New York Governor Edward Kincaid. She hoped to land a top job if he decided to run for president. If New York was the mountain, then the White House was the highest point, and Kincaid was a talented climber. In the small dinner club, everyone was watching Susan, even the musicians getting ready at the back of the room. Wherever she went, people couldn't help but look at her. At 32, she was one of the most beautiful women around. The only time she might not stand out as the most attractive person in a room was when her sister Mary was by her side. Then it was hard to choose what to do, but lately, Mary had lost a lot of weight because of problems in her marriage. On the bright side, Susan's husband was much easier to deal with. Stephen did not earn much money as a lawyer. Susan often thought he wasn't the best fit for a job that needed a lot of self-promotion. Stephen was a shy and thoughtful person. He only felt comfortable when he was in a courtroom. In his daily life, he was too shy to do the things needed to get ahead as a lawyer. Susan's job helped pay the bills, and if it didn't, she could always rely on the large fortune of the DeVoe family. Like her sister Mary, who was a high-ranking partner in an important Wall Street law firm, Susan was very ambitious. Some people said this came from her average father, but the DeVoes were also known for being very greedy, and Susan was a greedy person deep down. She had a deep love for life. She felt very protective and jealous of her most important treasure, her husband. When her phone beeped, she leaned back and rested her high heels on the bar stool. She was a tall woman married to a shorter man, but she loved wearing heels and felt incomplete without them. She turned her legs to one side and read the message. "Traffic in NYC. I'll be late. See you soon." The message was from her friend, Tony Greco. He was the governor's main political helper. That's how they first met. Tony was the kind of man she admired, tall, strong, and confident. He was a good-looking guy and knew how to charm women. People called him an alpha male, but he didn't have the same looks as her husband, Stephen. Stephen was shorter but very attractive. He had those special features that some Irish men have. He looked a bit like a young Peter O'Toole or a shorter Pierce Brosnan. Stephen was the kind of man who caught your attention right away. If Susan had been the type to only love one man, Stephen Fitzgerald would have been that man. She cared deeply for her husband, but she knew she could never be happy with just one partner. Like her sister Mary, who often cheated on her kind and devoted husband, Susan felt unable to be loyal. This didn't mean she loved less. Both Susan and Mary grew up in a happy home with two loving parents. Family traits might lead them to explore, but they always came back. The DeVoe Singleton girls might go on adventures, but they would never stray too far. They would never think of putting another man, no matter how charming, before their husbands. Still, they enjoyed having fun. Tony Greco was an interesting and lively companion. He stood out as the most exciting of her many friends. Susan had many people who liked her. They were a constant part of her life. At first, she was scared of them. When she was 13, she started to see how much power her looks had. Boys and men would do almost anything for her, but she felt uneasy about their feelings. Their strong feelings seemed strange and risky. As she got older, the attention from boys grew, and so did her own confusing feelings. By the time she was 17, she chose to be with a man who was much older, a 44-year-old banker. He was married, but he made sure to show her a good time and help her enjoy their time together. When it was finished, Susan couldn't help but think about why she had worried so much. She had a good time, and she wondered, what was the harm in that? When she met Stephen Fitzgerald, Susan learned a lot about attraction. He was shy, almost too shy, but very good-looking. She soon found out he was 20 years old, 4 years younger than her. He seemed like he would be easy to be with, but he was not. She had to put in some effort to get close to him. The younger Stephen was scared of being intimate. It felt like a strange and difficult relationship. She was the one chasing after him, and he was the one being chased. The more he tried to pull away, the more she felt drawn to him. Finally, she asked him to be with her and wouldn't accept his refusal. Her strong will won over his hesitations. Their wedding night was a new experience for both of them, and it brought them closer together. She had often been with other men, but this time she was in charge of her own choices. It felt great, and it was love. But it wasn't all there was, and she was a woman who wished for more and could reach for it. "Can you turn up the volume, please?" Susan asked the bartender, who was quietly admiring the beautiful brunette. The local evening news was just starting on the TV above the bar. The words scrolling across the screen said, "Breaking news, verdict in the Hamilton trial." Roger Hamilton's lawyer was Stephen Fitzgerald, chosen more by chance than for any other reason. Hamilton looked very guilty, and the proof against him was too strong to ignore. Roger, just as proud as Susan recalled from her time at Yale, rejected all offers to make a deal. He believed his money and famous family name would somehow save him. No lawyer wanted to take the case and face a big loss. Hamilton changed lawyers several times, letting each one go until by chance, Stephen's firm ended up with his case. The main lawyer quickly passed Hamilton's case to his younger colleague. Hamilton was not happy with his lawyer, but the judge was tired of waiting and pushed things along. Roger complained a lot about his lawyer, but the case continued, and after weeks of witnesses and discussions, they finally reached a decision. The news about the situation had been everywhere, even featured in national media. Susan believed that any attention was good attention, so she encouraged her husband to step into the spotlight. "Just talk to them. If not for your own sake, do it for me. I want to be proud of you." Stephen, as shy as ever, managed to give a couple of short interviews. No one thought they would win. Susan hoped for at least a small win, maybe a lesser charge, or if luck was on their side, a charge of manslaughter. The story was about her husband's great skills in the courtroom. The camera focused on the news anchor. He said, "Not guilty," said the jury. "Now, here's Cokie with the details." They switched to a cheerful woman who looked mixed race and was very cute. Susan noticed that the camera only showed her from the waist up. As always, her report was very shallow, and they quickly switched to an interview with Roger Hamilton outside the courthouse. There was Roger, standing next to his much younger girlfriend. Reporters shoved microphones in his face as he insisted he was innocent of his late wife's murder. He thanked the jury for realizing the truth. "Where are you, Stephen?" Susan said quietly to herself. Next, the prosecutors, including the county DA and his team, talked about the unfairness of the decision made by the confused and misled jury. That was the end of the interviews. Cokie and the host chatted for a moment about the unexpected decision. Cokie mentioned something about having doubts, and then it was finished. "Ugh, Stephen," Susan said to herself a bit too loudly, which made the bartender notice her. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Oh, it's nothing, just a publicist with a shy husband." "Could I have another martini, please?" she asked, finishing the drink in her hand. The bartender looked puzzled, but went to prepare her another drink. 20 minutes later, Tony Greco showed up, just as the local sports were on. They greeted each other with a warm, gentle kiss, even if it was a bit shy given the crowd around them. Tony felt a strong sense of attraction as he looked at the woman he found most appealing. "Did you hear the news?" she asked. Tony, always careful with his words, managed to hide his surprise and kept a small, friendly smile on his face. "Yes, congratulations. The governor and I heard the news while riding in his car on the way here." The governor was really happy for his former student and even said he played a part in his success. Susan smiled back, happy to see the governor's excitement. "Governor Kincaid used to coach Stephen in mock trial. He did a great job, too. He must feel very proud," she said. "Should we look for a table?" "I have something to tell you," Tony said. "Oh, can't we wait for the national news first? I want to check if they reached a decision." Tony didn't really dislike Stephen Fitzgerald, but he was definitely jealous of him. It was a strange feeling. Tony usually had no problem getting dates, but Susan DeVoe Singleton was different. She was special to him. He was trying to gather his courage to ask her to marry him. This was the first time he had thought about such a big step in a relationship. It was troubling to realize that there was not only a rival, but also that this woman was married to another man. Susan never spoke badly about her husband. At first, Tony thought the small, unsuccessful man was not much of a threat. But as he got to know Susan better and saw their bond growing, he began to notice how much she cared for her husband. Anything that made Stephen happy made Tony feel bad. The surprising success he was experiencing felt more like a problem than a blessing. "Okay, I can get another round," he said. "I'll pass for now. I've already had 2. Just a club soda for me." Tony ordered the drinks, working hard to keep a smile on his face. When the national news played, it wasn't good for him. The surprising decision was all over the news and became a topic for one of those discussions. The so-called legal experts knew exactly who to blame and had their quotes ready. The prosecution messed up. The old prosecutor from Los Angeles, now retired for over 10 years, said, "They let Foxy Fitzgerald take the jury into the land of doubt." The strong, middle-aged lawyer for the defense was not going to let him off easily. "Come on! All Fitzgerald did was show that the timeline was hard to believe and then suggest a more likely suspect. One who just happened to leave the country. But you have to agree he is quite handsome," the young lawyer and legal news commentator said, as a photo of Stephen appeared on the screen. It was clear she was talking about Stephen's looks when the panelists, both men and women, smiled knowingly, and the segment came to an end. "Wow, did you see that?" Susan exclaimed. Then she picked up her phone to call. "Answer your phone, Stephen. This is your wife," she said into his voicemail. Tony started to feel concerned that the special evening he had planned with his partner might not happen after all. "Do you still want to grab dinner?" he asked. She smiled brightly and gently touched his face, feeling the roughness of his evening stubble. "Of course. I'm feeling extremely excited, and my husband is going to be out of it until at least morning." Tony smiled at her first words, but his confusion showed when he heard the last part. "Stephen gets sick after. He struggles with vomiting and shaking, all of it. It's a funny kind of nervousness. He stays calm and clear-headed while he's performing, but once it's over, he struggles to speak. He won't celebrate his win until tomorrow." "Are you ready to join me?" she asked, with a playful smile. After a nice dinner, Tony shared what he wanted to tell her. "You're going to be offered the job of media consultant for the governor," he announced. Susan's face lit up with a big smile, and she leaned in to give Tony a quick kiss on the cheek. "I can't believe this. I don't know how to thank you," she said with a mischievous grin. "You're the best choice for this job. You truly earned it," he replied. They both understood that this was not entirely right. She would not have had this chance without him. He had hoped to use this moment to ask her to marry him, but now, with the surprise news about the Hamilton trial, he paused. Why couldn't that weak Fitzgerald have made a mistake? With his face everywhere on TV, he seemed even more powerful. It was wiser to hold off on the proposal until a better time. The governor's ball next month would be a perfect opportunity. Susan and her husband did not get an invitation, but the governor's main helpers did. He could bring Susan as his guest to a fancy event, saying she was there as the new outside media consultant for the governor. It was not quite proper for him to be with another man's wife, but it would present them as a couple in front of everyone. He could ask her to marry him while enjoying the spotlight of a governor who was about to become a strong candidate for president. Susan was not only beautiful, but also very driven. Tony understood what Susan wanted. The job of presidential press secretary was the biggest dream in public relations. It was the highest position, and it seemed like Susan DeVoe Singleton was meant for it. Tony was set on making sure that when she got this job, she would no longer be just DeVoe Singleton, but Mrs. Anthony Greco. The moon had already gone down when the headlights of Susan's BMW cut through the early morning mist along Old Altamont Road. Her GPS was useless here, as her tired eyes searched for the turn onto the dirt road leading to the old farmhouse. It wasn't too far from Tony's place in Loudonville, but the last 5 miles took her deep into the countryside. Susan turned off the main road onto the farm road, the one she owned. A mile down the road, she turned once more into the steep driveway of her home. In winter, her fancy car was not the best choice for this rough path. During those months, she preferred to drive her Jeep Rubicon. She had chosen this house herself, away from the busy city life of Manhattan. Unlike her apartment, this place was a small farmhouse with 2 old barns sitting on 20 acres of rocky land. But things had changed. What used to be a cozy farmhouse was now a large 5,000-square-foot house with a garage big enough for 4 cars at the end of a cobblestone driveway. The old house was now part of the new one. Its old barns had been turned into a guest house and a place for big parties and meetings, but the real heart of the house was in the small top floor. This upper floor had 4 little bedrooms along with the master bedroom. All the rooms were snugly set around the master suite. These were the rooms where Susan's kids lived. Stephen was a great husband, smart, good-looking, and had a decent job. He was the perfect partner for a busy career woman. Stephen never asked for much and was always dependable. Susan wanted to have at least 3 kids, maybe even 4. She wanted to give her dad something her sister Mary could not, at least 1 grandson. It was really her mother who wanted a grandson, a DeVoe boy. Their last talk had been clear. "When will I see babies?" Catherine DeVoe asked. "Shortly after the new year," Susan replied. "Is Stephen ready for this?" "Please, Mom, I can take care of my own husband." "And the other one?" Catherine inquired. "I will deal with my partner as I always do. If only your brother would—" Her mother did not finish her sentence. Susan's brother Jonathan couldn't have kids and was gay. He worked with their dad in the family business, but they both understood that Mary would take over one day. The issue was that Mary only had daughters. Catherine DeVoe really wanted a grandson to lead the family business. Catherine cared about Mary's husband, Jason, who taught math, but he had disappointed her by only having daughters. Stephen had been a tough case to convince, but Catherine liked how clever he was. "He may not be a genius, but I've never met anyone as sharp as him, not even your dad," Catherine said when she first met Stephen. The porch light was on for her, along with the light in the hallway downstairs. It was very nice of Stephen. Now, if only he could get his picture taken, she thought. As she went upstairs, she noticed she felt different after being close to Tony. He had been waiting for 10 days, and now he was full of energy. Their time together had been filled with strong feelings and closeness. He had guided her with confidence, starting by having her kneel beside him, then leading her to his bedroom. He held her gently, wanting to feel closer to her. Susan felt certain that her partner wanted to take her away from her husband. She noticed that Tony seemed a bit jealous of Stephen. She understood that her relationships were not always easy for the other man to handle. Even though he felt jealous, Tony had done well and moved on to another way of being intimate after their previous encounter. He hadn't tried to please her in another way, and she didn't want that from him. When she got to the top of the stairs, she crept down the hall and into the bathroom shower. It was time for her to get ready for her husband. Susan enjoyed the exciting feeling of being close to her husband after spending time with another man. She knew this made her feel a bit bad, but being close to Stephen had always brought her a special kind of joy. Stephen was truly beautiful. His skin and face were as delicate as fine china. He could have been a star, and in a way he was when he was in the courtroom. Susan often thought that being close to her husband felt like having both a man and a woman together. Their moments together were gentle, fun, and often full of new ideas. Stephen was ready to do whatever she wanted. All she had to do was take the lead, and he would be right behind her. However, Stephen had some lines he wouldn't cross. He wasn't comfortable with some things and preferred to keep those private. Susan, on the other hand, found ways to enjoy herself with her other partners and saved special moments for her husband. That night, she got ready in the shower. She freshened up and then joined Stephen in bed. Stephen was feeling worn out after a long day of work at the trial. He was fast asleep when she climbed into bed next to him. She snuggled close to her husband and slept until the early morning sun shone through the windows, waking them up. Then she shifted her body over his, moving playfully like a cat. Their kisses were warm and passionate. She could sense his desire, and it made her smile. "I want you to kiss me more," she said softly. He hummed in reply. She settled herself comfortably, leaning down to feel his soft lips against hers. He acted in a way that reminded her of a girl, but really, he was much better than any girl she had ever been with. She had spent time with many girls and liked it, but they weren't men. She wanted a man, or maybe even a few men in her life. After marrying Stephen, she had tried to be more serious. She also focused on just one major outside relationship at a time. She was always with one strong, caring partner at a time. She felt that Stephen had some idea in a general way about her other relationships. She had tried to give him a soft hint more than once, but she made sure her husband could always say no without feeling bad. She never wanted Stephen to feel embarrassed. That was the last thing on her mind. In every other way, Susan worked hard to be a great wife. She tried to support her husband in all areas. Her help with money was clear, but she gave it freely and without complaints. She encouraged Stephen in his job and could only be seen as a bit pushy when she asked him to be more sociable and get the recognition he deserved. In their personal life, she used all her charm to make him happy, and honestly, her adventures outside their home only made her more bold. Susan was one of those women who found thrill in being flirtatious. Again and again, she brought that thrill home, sharing it with her husband at night. This morning was just like any other. Stephen's kisses made her feel amazing. She lay down next to him, out of breath. Her hand reached out, finding him ready and eager, but she thought it would be fun to play with him a little. "You need to be teased," she said with a playful smile. "Didn't I treat you well enough?" he replied with a chuckle. "Well, it seems your kisses are still working well. It's your face that's the issue." "My face?" She playfully grabbed him, giving a little squeeze. "It wasn't in view of the cameras yesterday like it should have been." "Oh, that. What were you thinking?" she asked. "There was a good reason," he replied. "Oh," she said as she moved closer to him. "And what might that reason be? It better be a good one," she teased, while playfully tightening around him. He sighed deeply. "I can't say," he admitted. "Oh, so maybe I can't let you finish," she said with a playful smile. Susan understood her husband well, like a favorite book she had read many times. If she wanted, she could keep him in suspense all day long. A man like Tony could easily get what he wanted, but Stephen just couldn't. "Please, I'm really sorry," he pleaded. "Maybe I can let it go this time since you helped an innocent man," she said with a light laugh. But her husband's reaction surprised her. He stopped what was happening and held her hands tightly. In that moment, she understood everything. Roger Hamilton came from a rich family that was losing its money. He didn't try to change what was happening. The Bush and Clinton families helped Roger with the Hamilton family's money issues. They messed up the American economy, which made it easier for the rich to get richer while many others struggled with work. So a proud and unhelpful man watched his own wealth grow while millions lost their jobs and homes. Roger took his good fortune for granted and acted as if he deserved it. He behaved in the most arrogant and selfish way he could. He was married to Shelley before everything changed in how people viewed work in America. Shelley was the daughter of a rich doctor. She liked to try to make important friends, but she wasn't very smart. Shelley felt upset when she learned that her husband had a very open view on relationships. He believed in enjoying life with many people and didn't hold back. At first, Shelley tried to fit into this way of living, but soon she became a burden for Roger. She wasn't as careful as the wife of a Hamilton should be, and she didn't need her father's money anymore. On the night she died, Shelley had dinner with a tall, big man. They came back to the Hamilton home, which was on a calm street. A bit later, the man left, and Roger came home. At 2:17 a.m., Roger called 911 to say his wife had been shot. The evidence against Roger Hamilton was very strong. From the moment the police showed up, he was the main suspect. The reason was obvious. There was evidence left behind from his unfaithful wife. Roger's .38 caliber police gun had been cleaned not long ago. Shelley had been shot once with this gun. The bullet that took her life was too damaged to be matched with any weapon. When the doctors examined Shelley, they found out she was about 8 weeks pregnant. Roger had both a reason and a chance to do it. He didn't really know why he waited until after 2 a.m. to ask for help. The district attorney felt confident about winning the case, maybe too confident. David Warner, a partner at Rosewood and Associates law firm, handed the tough Hamilton case over to Stephen Fitzgerald. Stephen's nickname, Foxy, seemed very wrong to the slow-witted Dave the deal-maker Warner. Dave was known for getting the best deal in every criminal case he handled. But the proud Mr. Fitzgerald, Hamilton refused the deal for a lesser charge and chose to face a trial, where the most he could hope for was a second-degree murder charge. Stephen had a different plan than the well-known lawyer David Warner. He decided to change the narrative of Shelley Hamilton's murder. He understood the prosecution's story. Shelley brought a man to her home one evening, arriving around 8 o'clock. They spent time together, and when he left, everything seemed normal. Later that night, before midnight, Roger came home to find his wife with another man. A big fight broke out when Shelley told her husband that she was going to have a baby with someone else. In a moment of anger, Roger Hamilton shot his wife. Afterward, he tidied himself up and cleaned the gun before calling for help. To make things better, Stephen would have to change the story a lot. Imagine it like one of those big Hollywood movies that don't really wrap up in a way that makes everyone happy. In this situation, the audience is a jury looking for justice, much like what they see on TV. Even though the Hamilton case seemed like an easy win for the prosecutors, Stephen Fitzgerald didn't think anything was guaranteed. He had a story to share. He just needed a new way to present it. He started by carefully going over the evidence, thought about some new ways to tell the story, and set out to find a travel agent and a landscaper. "Good morning. It's Mrs. Jean McCarthy." "Eleanor, is that you?" Stephen said, flashing his biggest smile. The old woman was calm. The young man in front of her was small and had a sweet face. "Yes, that's me," Mrs. McCarthy answered. "I'm just making sure that the Hamilton gardener has been cutting your grass." "Oh, yes. He comes every 2 weeks. He never skips," she replied. The small 2-bedroom McCarthy house sat next to the big Hamilton mansion. It had a small lawn, about 300 square feet, which was much smaller than the big 5-acre Hamilton property. The front part of the street had simple homes that looked similar. The new back part of the road had houses that were much bigger than the rest. The McCarthy house was the last simple home on the street, right next to the Hamilton driveway. Just a thin piece of grass was in between them. The landscaper understood that to cut the grass between the Hamilton driveway and the McCarthy yard well, he would have to cut some grass in the McCarthy yard too. After noticing the kind older woman who lived there, the young landscaper finished working on the entire yard in just 3 extra passes with his big lawn tractor. When Stephen talked to the landscaper, he brought up this detail, along with what they discovered hidden among the rose bushes. No one had taken the time to talk to the landscaper before. He was a dedicated young man whose degree in English had not led him to a good job in the tough job market. His wife worked as a secretary and had just had a sweet little girl. He had some pictures, but mostly he was worried about his debts. "That's good to know. Mr. Hamilton wanted me to come here specifically. I'm his lawyer, and since he can't get out on bail, he hasn't been able to see if the landscaper is still taking care of your yard," Stephen said. That was a complete lie. If Roger Hamilton knew how generous his landscaper was, he never told Stephen. Please thank him for me and tell him how sorry I am for his problems. I will, and can I ask you for a glass of water? It's a really warm day, he said. He was happy to be welcomed, and he enjoyed a glass of iced tea. He showed his thanks 2 days later by bringing a plate of homemade muffins. When I told my wife about your kindness, she made me bring you some muffins she baked this morning, Stephen said to Mrs. McCarthy. But Susan did not know how to bake. The farmer's wife, who lived 2 miles down Old Altamont Road, had a small farm stand that sold fresh blueberry muffins each morning. Stephen returned to see the woman he hoped would be a key witness in the case. By the third visit, they were talking about the Hamilton case together. Mrs. McCarthy was an older lady who had lost her husband. She had 1 son who was married and had 3 sons of his own. This made her feel a bit lonely. She only had a few friends among the older folks who lived nearby. Her son and his family came to visit every other weekend, but most of the time she spent her days alone with her collection of recipes and watching TV. Jay Leno is my favorite, she said with a smile. I'm not sure what I'll do when he retires, she said. You watch him every night? He asked. Every night except Thursday. That's bingo night. The Thompsons from down the street, you know, the house with the green and white trim. We go to bingo together. After that, we eat at the old Loudon Diner for the Thursday night special. It's usually turkey or ham, she explained. So you missed Jay on Thursday night, he said. Oh, no, I record him, she replied. My son got me this special DVR, she said. A DVR for your cable TV, he replied, looking closely at the device in the living room. It seems complicated. Yes, it is a bit much for me, she admitted with a chuckle. But my son set it up for me. If I mess it up, he fixes it when he visits. Does it give you a lot of trouble? He asked, examining everything, trying to find any mistakes in what the older woman said. He had read her statement many times. The police had already talked to her. The messy district attorney's office had never really talked to what they thought was a small, not very important witness. It's just a simple button push, but I often have to ask my son to reset things, she said. You mentioned that on the night Mrs. Hamilton passed away, you were watching Jay. After the show ended, you saw Mr. Hamilton coming up the driveway. Yes, he was bringing in the garbage cans. They usually take out 2, and Friday is the day they pick them up. When he gets home, he parks his nice car in the garage and then carries the empty cans back to his house. And you saw all this from your kitchen window? He asked. Yes, the window faces the driveway, she replied. But why were you in the kitchen if you were watching Jay? He inquired. Well, Jay had just finished, and that's how I knew it was 12:35. Her show finished 5 minutes late because they added extra sports to the 11 o'clock news, she explained. Why did you head to the kitchen right away? He asked. Well, it was Friday, and my son and his family were coming over for dinner on Saturday. I was getting ready to make my special pot roast with the wine and carrots. You remember the recipe I gave you for your wife? Oh, yes, it's really good. She is baking something for you as a thank you, he replied, hiding the lie behind a friendly smile. He made up a story about Susan Fitzgerald just for Mrs. McCarthy. You are so lucky. Young women these days are all about their jobs. They don't have time to care for their families, she said. Yes, I'm a very lucky man, but you went to the kitchen to get a pot roast. Oh, no, silly. I was just taking the meat out to thaw. I see, but can you explain how you do it step by step? I want to understand. You have to be careful. I'm sorry to say this, but many people in my job try to fool others and catch them off guard. I don't mean to worry you, but when you speak in court, you have to be really cautious, he said. They chatted for another hour, and he won over Mrs. McCarthy told him that she had seen Hamilton near the garbage cans at around 1:15 a.m. He had gotten up to leave when he asked the key question that was part of their plan. Do you remember the guest on Jay's show that night? Oh, yes, it was that sweet girl from the famous acting family. She can be a bit wild now, but she has a good heart. I really like her, Mrs. McCarthy replied. Are you talking about Sigourney Weaver? He asked, looking confused. No, I can't stand her. Was it the girl from E.T.? Drew Barrymore? Are you sure? He asked. Yes, that's her. I can never remember her name, but she seems really nice. Okay, let me make sure I have this right. You fell asleep that night, and then you heard the Thompsons' dog barking. You think the dog woke you up, but you're not completely sure. After that, you turned on the TV to watch Jay, and he started talking. Once he finished, you turned off the TV and went to the kitchen, he said. Yes, that's exactly what happened. You really pay attention, don't you? If McCarthy had looked closer, she would have noticed that she surprised Stephen Fitzgerald for the first time. But he bounced back quickly and understood where he had gone wrong. He figured out why the timeline didn't match up and where a good prosecutor could have solidly built their case. It was a mistake that someone older, living alone, might make. Just a little mix-up, nothing serious. They began the Hamilton trial on a bright, sunny day. The reporters filled the narrow street by the courthouse with their big broadcast trucks. They got their cameras and microphones ready for updates throughout the day. However, they overlooked the steady weakening of the prosecution's case. Normally, the prosecution would start with their expert witnesses, hoping to show strong forensic evidence. This kind of evidence usually went without question, but this time, things were different. The defense asked each witness a lot of questions. Attorney, you say you found wool fibers? Witness, yes. Attorney, what type of wool? Witness, similar to the defendant's jacket. Attorney, just answer the question. What type of wool? Witness, wool, like from a sheep. Attorney, are you certain? From a sheep? Witness, yes, a sheep. But the longest questioning was with the coroner. It went on for a second day. Jerry Tochi was a well-respected man. He had worked for over 30 years in the coroner's office, but by the end of his career he felt frustrated. Attorney, you say the time of death was decided based on several factors. You think it was around 11 p.m. Witness, I will say it again. Mr. Fitzgerald, I said about that time. It could have been as early as 9 or as late as 1 a.m. Attorney, so you might be mistaken about the time? Witness, no, I am saying again, between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. At 1 a.m., the attorney asked, could it have been earlier or later? Coroner Tochi looked at the jury and smirked, showing how silly he thought the defense lawyer was being. He replied clearly, I am saying it was about 11 p.m., but definitely not before 9 or after 1 a.m. The attorney then pressed, so you are sure it was not before 9 or after 1? Are you certain? Witness, yes, I'm sure. After the last expert witness, the prosecution felt pretty good about their case. But they knew they had to prove why the defendant might have done it and show that he was there. So, they called on some eyewitnesses. The first was the valet parking attendant from the restaurant. He promised he saw Shelley Hamilton enter McGuire's, a fancy restaurant, holding hands with a tall, big, black man. The pair seemed very close. During the questioning, he agreed that the woman was wearing very revealing clothes, and the man seemed quite controlling. The people on the other side of the case struggled to hide their happiness at how poorly the defense was performing. Eventually, everything changed when the defense's plan fell apart. This happened when the other side called Lori LaFave to the stand. All the prosecution needed from Lori was a straightforward story about the victim and her date enjoying a nice dinner together, but it seemed that Lori had different thoughts. He had one hand on her leg and the other was too close. He acted like he was in charge. I mean, it's a decent restaurant, she explained. Thank you. No more questions, said the male assistant prosecutor. There were two assistant district attorneys. One was an older man and the other was a young woman. The district attorney had disappeared after the first day, getting ready for a big comeback during the closing remarks. As Stephen stood up, he pulled away the cloth that had been hiding the easel at the defense table. Everyone in the court had been curious about what was under it since day one. Now it was finally revealed, and a quiet spread across the courtroom. The judge and jury had the clearest view, and their gazes were glued to a larger-than-life photo of a man's face. It could have been a driver's license photo, but the picture showed a man with a friendly smile. Stephen decided to get rid of that license photo and use a work ID from the city school district instead. In this new photo, Leroy Johnson, a senior maintenance worker, looked unhappy. So far in the trial, Leroy had only been talked about as a black man. Not recognizing him was something the prosecution did on purpose, because there were no witnesses who could clearly identify Leroy on the defense's list. Leroy had a record for hitting someone. His record was not serious and was from a long time ago, but smart lawyers know not to bring up anything that doesn't help their case. Since the defense didn't say anything, the prosecution kept their position strong. However, the defense's witness list had been a sneaky trick. Stephen looked at Lori as she stood on the witness stand. He felt everyone in the room was watching him, not the picture he was holding. He noticed Lori's small smile as she seemed to think, "What a clever guy he is." "Lori, do you know this man in the photograph?" he asked. "Yes, that's Leroy Johnson," she answered, just like she practiced with Stephen the night before. "Objection!" shouted the male assistant district attorney. In court, only the male prosecutor had the right to object since he had led the questioning. His real problem was that the defense was using his witness, but he had been caught in a trap. The judge looked at the witness and said, "I think the prosecution wants to know, as I do, how you know Mr. Johnson, whoever he is." "Oh, he's the man we were discussing in the restaurant with Mrs. Hamilton." "I understand," said the judge. "But how did you find out his name?" "It was written on his credit card when he paid for dinner." "All right, counselor, if you want, you can present evidence against this during your response," the judge said, aware that the prosecutor would probably not do so. The defense had pulled a fast one. The judge realized he needed to keep an eye on the young lawyer defending the case. This attorney wasn't exactly what he appeared to be. "Now, can you explain what was Johnson wearing that night?" Stephen asked. "Yes, gray slacks and a blue sports jacket," she replied. "I object," he said. "Overruled," the judge replied. "I believe Mr. Fitzgerald will explain how she knows what the jacket was made of." The jurors chuckled along with the laughter in the room. Stephen lowered his voice and asked, "How do you know that?" "I have 3 jobs," she answered. "I have 2 jobs as a waitress because they only want to hire me part-time. My other job is at a store that sells clothes for bigger men. I saw a jacket that looked like one we sell. It's a warm, medium-weight blazer made from all wool and designed for bigger sizes." "I have no more questions," Stephen said. "Can we take a moment?" asked the prosecution. The judge allowed a short break for them to gather their thoughts. As he looked at Stephen, the judge gave him a serious but slightly amused look. The boy might not succeed, he thought, but it wouldn't be because he was boring. "Ms. LaFave, or should I say Mrs. Mendez?" the lawyer asked again. Lori was a fair-skinned woman, looking very much like someone from an Anglo-Saxon background. However, she had once been married to a Mexican man, who was sent back to his country for being in the U.S. without permission. She had 3 children, each with a different father, and she was struggling to make ends meet. The lawyer was getting ready to question their own witness, something that is tricky to do in court. After splattering some mud on Lori, the prosecutor got to what he really wanted to say. "How do you know Mr. Fitzgerald?" "Besides, from here, he often visits McGuire's with a tall, pretty woman named Susan Singleton. I know her name because it's on her credit card. She pays," Lori said, shaking her finger at Stephen. The courtroom broke into laughter. Stephen waited for it to calm down a little before he spoke. "She's my wife." "I promise," he said, sounding really upset as more laughter filled the room. The judge let the laughter go on for a moment before calming everyone down. The well-rehearsed little act between Stephen and Lori had worked. The other side was clearly caught off guard. They went over to the defendant's jacket. "Do you recognize this jacket?" the prosecutor asked, thinking the witness would mess up and say she didn't know. But she didn't mess up. "Not really. You don't usually find cashmere in a big and tall store," she said, just like she had practiced. "What?" the confused prosecutor replied. "You know that fancy fabric from Asia made from some kind of goat?" "Wool costs less and comes from sheep," she said, sounding very innocent. The lawyer looked at the jury. They seemed confused. The fibers found on the victim couldn't have come from the defendant's jacket. They had to be from somewhere else, like Leroy's jacket. The lawyers gathered together and decided to drop the line of questioning before this witness hurt their case. It was better to move on and let it go. The next person they would call to the stand was an easy one. Eleanor McCarthy felt every bit of her 71 years. She had only spoken briefly on the phone with the young woman from the prosecutor's office. The woman had just read Eleanor's statement to the police back to her. Eleanor had to pass many cameras and news trucks to reach the courthouse. Now she was waiting in a busy hallway, feeling all alone. When they asked her to come into the busy courtroom, she felt nervous, but then she spotted a kind face among all the unfamiliar people. Stephen had a big smile on his face. He looked truly glad to see her, and he really was. Eleanor had to promise to tell the truth. Then she stated her name and where she lived for the official record. After that, the woman lawyer began asking her simple and direct questions. When she attempted to explain, someone sharply interrupted her, saying, "Just answer the question. Did you see Roger Hamilton that night?" "What? I don't get it." "Did you see Roger Hamilton on the night his wife was killed?" "Oh, yes, he was." "Where?" Stephen Fitzgerald stood up. He smiled at Mrs. McCarthy, said, "Excuse me, Your Honor, can the witness please finish her answers?" William Constable had been a judge for 19 out of the 20 years needed to retire with full benefits. However, he still had 10 years to go before he had to step down. He had seen many lawyers during his time, but very few were as smooth as the one standing in front of him now. "Yes, the defendant's lawyer is right. Please let the witness complete her answers," said Judge Constable. The young prosecutor took a deep breath. "Where did you see Mr. Hamilton?" the judge asked. "I saw him in his driveway. He was bringing his trash cans up to his house after he parked his car in the garage." Mrs. McCarthy smiled gently at the lawyer on his side. "Can you tell us what time that was?" the prosecutor asked, relieved to finally get to the point with the long-winded witness. 1:45 a.m., the witness replied confidently. "What?" There was a rush at the prosecution table as they looked for the police report. "You mean 12:45 a.m., right?" "No, I'm sure it was about 1:45 or a bit later. But you told the police it was 12:35. "No, I said it was after Jay Leno's show, which ends at—" Mrs. McCarthy then talked about everything she did that night. She even shared a quick version of her pot roast recipe, but she was firm about the time. When Stephen stood up for his turn to ask questions, she welcomed him with a friendly smile. He smiled back and said, "No questions." The prosecution brought in several witnesses. They seemed to be there to talk about reasons, but really they just wanted to damage the defendant's reputation. In this situation, they were showing the true nature of a very proud and selfish man. At last, they took a break on a Thursday evening and went to their office to prepare for their strategy against the long list of experts that the defense team had given them. The competition was fierce, and they were ready to fight back. Stephen Fitzgerald had tricked them before, but now they were prepared. A young woman spotted a witness who didn't seem to have a clear role. He was a private investigator named Lux, hired just before the trial began. "What's his purpose?" she asked, but everyone just shrugged and focused on getting ready to question Roger Hamilton. They planned to really challenge him. Right at 9 o'clock on Friday morning, the judge started the court session. "Are you ready, Mr. Fitzgerald?" the judge asked. "Yes, I call Martin Lux," Mr. Fitzgerald replied. Mr. Lux stepped up to the stand. He took his oath and shared his business address along with his job as a private investigator. "Who are you working for now?" Stephen asked. "For you, Mr. Fitzgerald." "What did you need from me?" "I asked you to find out where Leroy Johnson is." "Did you find him?" "Yes, I did," Lux said, grinning widely, and everyone in the courtroom leaned in closer, except for those at the prosecution table who already knew. "Where is he now?" "He's in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil." For a moment, there was complete silence. Then a group of reporters dashed for the door like they were in an old film. When Judge Constable finally brought the room back to order, a few minutes had gone by. The prosecutors chose not to ask the witness any questions. They were worried about proving that Leroy was at the Rio Hilton and had been there since the trial began. What happened next was quick and surprising. "The defense is done, Your Honor, and I'm ready to finish up," said the lawyer. "Your Honor, we would like to take a break," said the prosecutors. Judge Constable looked thoughtful, but he was really trying to remember who Stephen looked like. "Sorry, Counselor, if the defense is ready, he can go ahead." "Don't worry, I'll give you time to bring the DA here for his big moment." The judge didn't mention that he thought the DA might be a little unprepared, which was exactly what the defense was hoping for. Who plays this game fast and messy? The judge wondered. Stephen was clear and direct. He pulled the easel with Leroy Johnson's picture over to the jury box. For 20 minutes, he explained why Leroy was guilty, even though Leroy was not there to speak for himself. He ended with a strong question. Who killed Shelley Hamilton? Was it her unfaithful husband who came after the coroner said she was already dead? Or the man she had dinner with? A man who wanted to control her and was now safely out of the law's grasp? Said Stephen Fitzgerald. As he finished speaking, he looked each juror in the eye. The district attorney, who had to make a speech quickly, didn't manage to do the same. The DA's case did not improve because he made some mistakes about important facts. Those errors came from the smart tactics used by the defense regarding when Roger came home and what material his coat was made from. But the district attorney hadn't really watched the evidence, so he didn't know what happened in the courtroom. It seemed like an easy case to win, didn't it? The judge sent the jury to discuss everything right after 3 o'clock. As he did, he had a thought. That young assistant district attorney in Van Patten. What was his name? Something Irish. The jury quickly returned with their not guilty decision, just in time for the evening news. The TV reporters were stunned by the verdict because they didn't get to see the trial. The newspaper reporters had already written their articles. While celebrating with his friends at McGeary's, a small bar close to the courthouse, one of the best writers said, "And just like that, the story is over." All that happened was that the private investigator made the district attorney look bad. Hamilton was seen as innocent by everyone except the prosecutor, at least for a few days, or so the news said. Things changed when Leroy came back from his vacation. He had won a contest, although he didn't remember signing up for it. The travel agent told him he really had won. It was a trip that he could not change or get his money back for. When Leroy came back, he had a strong alibi. Security video showed him picking up his sister at the airport at 9:15 p.m. He also had several people who could confirm he was with them until after midnight. The Times-Union wrote a tough article about how wealthy people often avoid punishment, while those with less money struggle to find justice. Everyone understood that the focus was on the Hamilton case and the clever lawyer who defended Hamilton. Susan Singleton gazed at her dear husband across the kitchen table. He was the shining star of the Hamilton case. Even after her gentle complaints, she knew she could be a bit pushy. He managed to avoid the cameras. But as she watched him, she realized why. He could hide from everyone and even trick himself. But Susan was the woman who cared for him. She knew him well and had stood by him through good times and bad over the years. He did it, just like they claimed. He killed that woman and her baby. He's a terrible person, and you let him go free, she said. But even while she spoke, she reached her hand across the table to comfort her husband. She didn't know what else to say. She wanted to tell everyone about his big achievement, but at the same time she felt horrible for the woman who had been killed and her little child who was gone too. As for the lawyer, Stephen Fitzgerald, he kept quiet with his wife. He didn't tell her how he had paid a waitress to bend the truth a little. He also kept to himself how much money he gave the gardener to stay silent about the bullet shell he found in the rose bushes. One sleepy older woman had pressed the button on the DVR. As a result, she was watching The Tonight Show with Drew Barrymore on Thursday night at about 10:30. It was not the Friday night show with Sigourney Weaver. Mr. Johnson thought that Mrs. McCarthy woke up because of a loud bang that only she and a neighbor's dog could hear. She had seen Hamilton come back home after hiding the proof of what he did in the bushes at the end of the driveway. Stephen kept his thoughts to himself as he gave his bill to Roger Hamilton. This bill included the cost of the trip to Rio. Roger complained about the bill, until Stephen pointed out how bad it would look for Roger if he had to explain why all those charges were there. "You know your actions made me spend more time and money," Stephen said. "Think about what others might say, and how much your late wife's family might try to sue you for." As the Hamilton trial got less attention, the presidential election started to heat up. Susan Singleton found herself focusing less on her husband. But a new character appeared in people's thoughts. His name was Foxy Fitzgerald, and he was a lawyer who defended people in trouble with the law. Like all good stories, he was based on real-life ideas. The situation was especially difficult. Reverend Thomas McManus, who used to be an auxiliary bishop in Brooklyn, was very sick with pancreatic cancer. This disease had spread from his pancreas to the rest of his body, causing him a lot of pain. Every 20 minutes, a small machine would make a noise and give him a drop of morphine through his IV to help ease his suffering. Morphine and the small hand resting on his were his only comfort from pain. The hand belonged to Maryann, who had been Mr. McManus's wife for the last 30 years. She had even changed her last name so that their 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, would share their father's name. Thomas was 73 years old and had retired a year before doctors found his cancer. Maryann was just starting to turn 50. At just 19, she was enchanted by the charming priest. Like many in North America, she was known as a housekeeper. Thomas was a bishop working for the diocesan cardinal. He was a wealthy man who owned a home on Congress Street in the nice Cobble Hill area of Brooklyn. His partner and their kids seemed to live in their own apartment, but that was just for appearances. Maryann McManus was always by the side of the man she called her husband at the hospital. He was a good man who took care of his children. He was strong and better because he had a family to love and support him, as he loved and supported them in return. A piece of Maryann's heart was fading next to the bed where she sat, but her 50-year-old body was strong and could have many years of being alone ahead of it. Most women like Maryann often see things in a simpler way. It's hard not to. It takes a loving woman to support her partner while staying in the background. "You exist," as one cardinal's wife told Maryann, as someone special in a relationship meant for one. Women like Maryann are sometimes seen as a necessary part of the church. They are a couple who share freely and ask for nothing in return. They are easy targets for a harsh and unfair church. However, Maryann is different. She has traveled a lot. She is the type of woman you can bring along anywhere. She was lovely in an everyday American girl way, with a charm that only surprised those who didn't know she was a gifted student. She started at Vassar College at 16 and graduated early with great marks at 19. Bishop McManus had taken Maryann to Rome 6 times. One visit had lasted over a year. While there, Maryann met other women like her, women who were quietly connected to priests. European women are not shy about sharing their experiences, especially when they are with each other. She had listened to stories from her friends in Europe. There were sad tales about losing inheritances, children being left behind, and women struggling to survive. She understood what the church wanted for her, so she made plans to protect herself. Thomas McManus was wealthy, even by American standards. He came from a well-known Irish-American family and had always had what he needed. Maryann lived a very nice life. She had no plans to lose her home or move to a low-income apartment in Yonkers. Although Maryann often felt like she was working like a maid in her own home, she made sure to keep the bishop's money safe from the greedy hands of the church. She secured his important papers. She also kept clear records of her children's fathers, like any smart woman would do. But the most important thing was that she had the file. That surprising file she discovered in her husband's secret wall safe on the day he visited the Kings County Medical Center for the last time. That day, she had broken into Tom McManus's home office safe. It was a move she made before she called for help. She wasn't meant to have the code or even know the safe was there, but she had figured those things out earlier. She followed the script from a movie and carefully sprinkled fingerprint powder on the number keys. With a set of 4 numbers, she quickly spotted her daughter's birthday. It was really a 6-digit code, but 2 of the numbers showed up again in December 15, 92. The legal file looked odd and its contents were puzzling. But as she read the names inside, she started to understand its importance. She realized this file was a powerful and dangerous item. Why Thomas needed it was unclear until she understood that his safe was like a secret space for hiding things. It kept a document that was too important to get rid of and too dangerous to store where anyone could find it. This document could ruin the person who held it just as easily as it could hurt the person it was meant for. A troubling list of wrongdoings saved for a time of great need. With her hidden file, Maryann McManus believed she could face any trouble that might arise, no matter how strong the challenges became. But she also felt bad about keeping a record that was meant for only one bad purpose. She was a caring woman in a tough situation. She had to choose between looking after herself and her loved ones and listening to her own sense of right and wrong. This choice was hard because of what the file held. It was both strong and wrong. Holding the file felt like accepting all the wrongs it showed. Destroying it would hide those wrongs, but giving it to someone else seemed impossible. Susan Fitzgerald Singleton walked into the governor's ball, linked with the tall and charming Anthony Greco. Her elegant black dress, which was open at the back and had a deep V-neck, made it clear that she was the most beautiful woman in the room. The green gems she wore, which belonged to her mother, showed that she was quite wealthy too. Tony felt proud as he led everyone's gaze to the main focus of the event, the governor of New York. Edward Kincaid, the governor, smiled as he met his new personal press secretary and quietly said, "Is this how you plan to make me popular? Just stand by me?" "Why, Governor, I'm just shining in your light," Susan answered. "No, I promise you, the moon is ignored when the sun comes up," he said. Then, raising his voice, he added, "Tony, it's great to have you here in place of Mrs. Fitzgerald's husband. We would have really missed her without you." The governor saw a quick flash of annoyance on Tony Greco's face when he mentioned his rival. Stephen Fitzgerald didn't expect to be invited to such a fancy event with the wealthy and famous. Most people thought he had his short moment in the spotlight last month when he unexpectedly won the Hamilton murder trial. But he was still the woman's husband. It wouldn't be right to openly show off her relationship with Greco in front of everyone. It was a well-understood matter, but keeping some distance was important. Susan was as clever as Kincaid. "Stephen is really let down. He was looking forward to thanking his old trial coach for helping him with the skills that won him the Hamilton case. But he asked me to say thank you for him," she said, her voice strong enough for those nearby to hear. The governor could only smile. Nice way to put it, he thought, feeling a bit proud to be part of Stephen's great achievement. The governor had quickly looked over the Hamilton papers and talked about them with the reporters who followed the case. No one could clearly say how Hamilton's odd defense led to a not guilty decision. Most people thought it was a rare event and that the young lawyer would soon be forgotten. However, he was the governor's former student, and Ed Kincaid deserved some recognition for that. Sure, Susan moved on to meet the other important guests. Many of them recognized her father, mother, sister, or some of her cousins. The wealthy were a close group, getting even smaller. Susan often thought about how many of them knew just how close her father had brought the family to losing everything with his risky bets. The beautiful emeralds she wore had been sold and bought back many times to help cover their value of $3 million when they needed money. This was the kind of crowd Susan liked. She moved through the crowd with ease, just like she always did. Tonight, she was here to help a well-liked governor who was running for president. He was the leader the state needed, and she planned to show the whole country why they needed him too. But right now, she was talking to supporters who already believed in him. This was just the beginning. The real campaign was still 2 years away. Both the governor and Susan, his new public relations helper, were starting out on this journey together. Like all trips, this one started with hope and happiness. It was still unclear if it would end in success or sadness. Susan and her partner danced when she wasn't complimenting the important people around her or talking up the governor's good qualities to his fans. Susan was a skilled dancer, but her partner was amazing. Tony had impressed many women with his smooth steps. He held her as close as was proper and made it clear that for that night she was special to him. But he was thinking about more than just one evening together. "Let's get some fresh air," Tony said as he wrapped his arm around Susan's waist. Susan glanced around to see if anyone was watching them, but at that moment, everyone was focused on the governor dancing with the doctor, Simone Redmond. She had just returned from Africa and was held back for checks by the Republican governor of New Jersey. O'Reilly was one of the governor's special interests. Susan had set it up so that tomorrow's New York Times would show a photo of the governor's ball, featuring Edward Kincaid dancing with the lovely doctor. The article with the photo would call the pediatric surgeon a brave and caring person and would also commend the governor for helping in the battle against Ebola. Susan did not notice the doctor's husband, the questionable lawyer Jimmy O'Reilly. He was a friend of Susan's husband, Stephen, but she couldn't really figure out why. The two men seemed like they were always competing and didn't share any interests. Plus, O'Reilly gave off the vibe of a shady lawyer. He was tall and good-looking, with dark, deep-set eyes that made him look a bit risky. This was very different from Stephen, who was short and thin, with clear blue eyes and an innocent look. Dr. Redmond avoided using her husband's name because of his bad reputation. Still, people thought they were very happily married. However, Susan had heard a rumor about Attorney O'Reilly and a young woman who worked for the governor. Carrie Wilson was the governor's assistant. She was only 25 years old and had graduated from Yale Law. Carrie was engaged to Ray Emerson, who was an important lawyer for the Assembly majority. Many people thought that Ray and Carrie had a different kind of relationship. Ray Emerson was known for his charm and often took models and aspiring actresses to shows and events around New York City. Carrie had been seen with a few men in Albany, but nothing too serious. They were a young couple, even though Ray was about 10 years older than Carrie. They were seen as a strong pair in politics. Carrie Wilson was the governor's favorite, but she was not seen as a traditional beauty. Carrie had long, shiny auburn hair and big brown eyes. She looked good, but she couldn't really compete with Simone Redmond O'Reilly. Simone had bright red hair and smooth, pale skin that shone in the lovely lights of the ballroom in the Grand Mansion. Both women wore nice clothes, but Carrie's outfit felt more casual and a bit preppy. In contrast, Simone chose an elegant look and she pulled it off perfectly. She and the governor looked great together as they danced. As they moved, Tony guided Susan toward the garden doors. With everyone watching the governor and the doctor, Susan felt comfortable allowing her partner to take her into the garden of the state mansion. The harvest moon shone brightly over the scene. It was a warm night for October in Albany, often called an Indian summer. Even so, Tony wrapped his jacket around Susan's shoulders to keep her warm. The garden was just a short walk from Eagle Street, where the new Victorian houses stood. They walked toward the tall buildings known as the South Mall. In the moonlight, the large state office buildings looked like something from another planet. It was very beautiful, this garden that seemed a mix of history and what was to come. Tony held her close and kissed her softly, feeling both warmth and a deep connection. He felt her heart race as he held her close. Her scent filled the air around them. Susan kissed him back just as eagerly. She enjoyed his strong embrace. She wasn't thinking about her husband at all. In that moment, Stephen seemed far away. Tony brought them back to reality. He gently broke their kiss and hugged her tightly. "I have something to ask you." "Not here, love. We shouldn't even be doing this." "Someone will notice," she whispered back, thinking he wanted to get closer, but she didn't try to pull away. "No, I want something different," he replied, then took a moment before he asked, "Will you marry me?" If someone had dumped a bucket of ice water on Susan, it couldn't have cooled her feelings more. But Susan had been through a lot in life. She smiled warmly and let out a soft laugh. It showed she liked the kind gesture but wanted to keep things light. It was just a sweet moment from a caring man. "I mean it. I want to marry you." "I want us to be a couple," Anthony Greco said. He held Susan gently by her arms and looked deeply into her bright eyes in the soft moonlight. "This feels very special, but isn't there a little issue with my husband?" she replied. "We both know he can't give you what you need, and you don't feel for him the way you feel for me," he said. "But I do care for Stephen, and we are married. He hasn't done anything wrong. How could I hurt him?" she asked. Susan spoke quietly and calmly. Susan was a woman who had often needed to let many men down softly in her life. Women like her draw attention just by being themselves in the evening air. All men can be sensitive, but strong ones can be even more delicate. A small comment could break their hearts like glass. "You need to focus on yourself, on us, and our joy," he said. This was exactly what Susan was trying to do. Choosing to marry Stephen had been the best choice she ever made. Stephen had decided to go along with it, but only after Susan had worked hard to convince him. In many things in their lives, Susan's opinion was the most important. One good thing about being married was that it kept away unwanted marriage requests. Most people think that if someone is already married, it's unlikely they will be asked to marry again. Susan had thought she could count on Tony, but she was mistaken. She knew their relationship was both strong and fun. She liked Tony and, in her own way, loved him. But she would never marry him, even if she had the chance. She just couldn't imagine that a man like Tony would want to marry someone with her past. She was open about her history and her mistakes. Men like Tony didn't allow their partners to stray. What was he thinking? She stepped closer. resting her head on his chest. "My love, you are a good man and very special to me, but you need to know. Stephen is my husband. He won't accept a divorce and could hurt both of us. I can't let you take that risk." Tony wrapped his arms around her, surprised by her words. He didn't see this coming. He had thought he could overlook her marriage. He didn't feel scared of Stephen Fitzgerald at all. In fact, he would be shocked to find out that Fitzgerald looked down on him completely. Fitzgerald thought the governor's assistant was just an underling and a fool. "I'm not scared of your husband," Tony said proudly. "But I am." Susan finally spoke up, sharing her true feelings for the first time in the conversation. She really was afraid of her husband. Deep inside, she understood that Stephen Fitzgerald was a very dangerous man. Calm, clever, and most importantly, heartless. The sweet smile he showed was like a mask he wore perfectly. She sometimes felt he belonged to a different world. He was a man without guilt or fear, someone who could focus on his goal and ignore everything around him. The garden doors of the mansion swung open, and the governor's guests stepped outside to get some fresh air. The band had taken a break from playing. Susan took the chance to step away from Tony's hold. "We should go in," Susan said, not stopping but moving away. She walked a little ahead of Tony as they went back into the ballroom. It was mostly empty now because the guests had left with the pause in the music. She was searching for someone to chat with and distract Greco, and she found her. "Hi, Laura. It's great to see you here," Susan said to the tall, light-haired woman who was with a well-dressed, attractive black man. Laura Sullivan had dark eyes and was the wife of Stephen's best friend. Over the years of their relationships and marriages, the two women had become friends. Like Susan, Laura was a woman who achieved more than her husband. Laura worked as a senior associate at a big law firm, while her husband was a junior assistant district attorney in a smaller county office. The two women had a lot in common. They were both a few years older than their husbands. More importantly, both women had chosen partners they could lead. They married men who were less driven, men who would back their goals and dreams. These were smart and sensible women, more practical than most. They still loved their husbands, whom they thought needed partners like them. "It's nice to see a friend. I feel a bit lost here," Laura said, leaning in to give Susan a quick kiss on the cheek. When she introduced him, the man beside Laura, who had his arm around her waist, was Frank Patterson. He was a senior partner at Laura's workplace. He knew Tony because he worked with the Black and Hispanic State Assembly caucus. The two men chatted casually while Susan took Laura to the bathroom. Once they left the men behind, Susan turned to Laura and said, "I'm so happy to see you." "I'm really glad too," Laura replied. "I had to come when a senior partner invited me, but he has plans that are more than just a dance or two." Susan laughed. While the two women were different in some ways, those differences mattered a lot. Laura wasn't as strikingly beautiful. Her blonde hair and dark eyes made her stand out, giving her a memorable look. She had a beautiful shape that caught attention. Susan, with her black hair, was even more attractive. She was a bit taller and more graceful, with a captivating beauty. However, the biggest difference between these two women was that Laura did not come from a wealthy family. Laura's husband earned very little as an assistant district attorney, while she brought in a solid income. However, her job also felt uncertain. Laura dreamed of a strong partnership and an even bigger salary. This was the hope of a girl who was smart but grew up with little. She worried about the future and imagined a large home filled with kids. But until she reached her goal of a partnership, Laura felt her dreams depended on men who only saw her as a pretty face and a chance to take advantage. Life as a woman working at a big law firm can be challenging. To succeed, you need a mix of intelligence and appearance. Laura had both of these qualities. The real question was how much she would be willing to use them. Does Patterson have ideas?" Susan asked. "Yes, but they mostly involve the bedroom," Laura replied. Susan glanced back at Patterson, who was chatting with Tony. "I don't think that's a bad place to end up." Laura smiled as they got to the line for the women's restroom. "You're a real tease, but I'm married now. Things are different than when I was just dating Patrick." The two women used to have fun together before they got married. They both enjoyed the company of handsome men. Susan was married to the easygoing Stephen, while Laura was with the fiery Patrick Sullivan. Both men had some things in common, but they were also very different. You know, we have the same issue, just the opposite. You're trying to keep away from your handsome guy, and I'm trying to get closer to mine." "What do you mean?" "Tony proposed to me." "What? Are you going to leave Stephen?" "Don't be silly. It's all about how to let Tony down gently after his proposal," Susan said, grinning at her friend. "Oh, the troubles you face," Laura replied with a laugh. When they got back to the guys, they saw Patterson arguing with Greco about some political topic. Tony looked happy but seemed glad to see the women again. Susan quickly understood what was happening and jumped in. "See? We leave you alone for just a bit, and you start a fight." "Typical guys. What are you arguing about now? Whose team has the best quarterback?" Susan said with a big smile. Tony stepped closer and replied, "Not that. Everyone knows Eli Manning is the best, but Frank was just saying his friends in the assembly are huge Giants fans." It seemed that having the women around took Frank's focus away from his team's goals, and the talk shifted to simple topics. Susan noticed that Frank was definitely planning to approach her friend. On the other hand, Laura was sending mixed signals. Susan could tell that Laura liked him but was also hesitant. Laura needed a reason to act, something to help her feel okay about her feelings. Susan felt relieved that she had moved past such childish behavior. If you like someone, just go for it, she thought. If your husband cares for you and is a good person, then there is nothing wrong with that. She thought this but could never say it out loud. Stephen was a good man, and he loved her. She could never imagine leaving him. It was hard to believe. "Do we need to pay for your thoughts?" Tony joked. Everyone around her was staring. "Oh, sorry. I was just thinking about a question someone asked me earlier," Susan said. She gave Tony a look that meant something special, and he smiled back. Just then, the band started playing again. This helped her avoid any more questions. She took Tony's arm and pulled him onto the dance floor. As she danced all night, she pushed away the annoying question in her mind. Tony had already made his move and was now just waiting for her response. He felt sure that it would be a good one. He believed, if he spoke honestly, that Susan was interested. He thought she would say yes to his offer. It was just a matter of time. The first week of November, Stephen Fitzgerald sat in his plain little office at a big law firm. He was a junior associate, and he owed this opportunity to his wife, Susan. She didn't do anything specific to help him, but her ties to him and her father's insurance business made him stand out among many other new law school graduates. He had done just okay at his job until the big moment of the Hamilton murder trial. In many ways, the Hamilton case was a lucky break. It was the right case at the right time for Stephen Fitzgerald. His firm had started using his name, but without saying it out loud, they usually kept him away from clients. Today, that was about to change. "Come in, Steve. I have someone here who is really looking forward to meeting you," Mark Tolan said. Tolan, the main partner at the firm, was usually called by his title. He was a strong Irishman. When he was younger, he had shiny black hair and bright blue eyes that many women admired. Now, at 60, his blue eyes had faded a little with age, and his black hair had just a touch of gray, thanks to his hairstylist. Stephen got ready, putting on his serious expression. The young lawyer quickly saw that the tall man with gray hair, handsome and in his early 50s, sitting across from him at Tolan's conference table was another lawyer, not a client. Reaching out his hand, the man said, "I'm Edward Jameson. It's great to meet you, Steve." Jameson observed every detail of Stephen Fitzgerald. He seemed like a simple and unthreatening person. Fitzgerald wasn't the choice he would prefer, but when clients are in tough spots, they often make hard decisions. "Ed has a case he hopes we can help with," Tolan said. The "we" meant Stephen, and he felt a rush of excitement because it surely meant a trial was coming. "I'm the lawyer for and good friend of Samantha Wheatmore," Jameson started, taking a moment to let the name settle in. Samantha Wheatmore's husband, the wealthy Stuart Peabody Wheatmore, had been found in the stables of their Westchester home, shot in the head. A Colt A1911 automatic gun was in his right hand. However, from the start of the investigation, the police said it was not a suicide. Instead, they turned their attention to proving that his wife, Samantha, was guilty of murder. "I have known Samantha for many years, ever since she was a young girl. I don't think she did what they say she did," Jameson said, feeling the sharp gaze of Stephen Fitzgerald, whose cool blue eyes seemed to see right into him. There was a short silence before Tolan started to talk. Ed was hoping we could take a look and share but Fitzgerald placed a strong hand on Tolan's arm, stopping him from speaking. Jonathan Cotell is the lawyer now. He has put this case all over the newspapers. He wants to change his plea to not guilty because he says he isn't mentally well. It seems he wants more attention for it, Stephen said, looking straight into Jameson's eyes. Jameson nodded in response. I'm not sure where you got that last bit of information, Jameson replied. He is insisting that we change our defense plan, but Sam won't agree, Jameson said, looking away and trying to keep his feelings in control. Stephen let out a gentle breath and stood up. Send me everything right away. I'll give you an answer by the end of the week. Is that really enough time? There is so much to go through, Jameson said. Fitzgerald was already leaving the room. It should be enough, but you need to be quick. If we want to succeed, we must begin now. Samantha Wheatmore had set a nice dinner table in one of the cozy rooms of her big house. When she first saw Stephen Fitzgerald, she thought he looked shorter than she had imagined. He looked amazing, like a movie star, but didn't seem very tall. Her second thought was about his eyes. They looked like they could see deep into your heart. This feeling grew stronger when they started to talk about the case. He wanted to meet alone before saying yes to help. Samantha invited him to dinner at the Wheatmore family home in Westchester. She was living there for now because she was waiting for her trial. Instead of using the fancy dining room, she decided to serve dinner in a cozy little room nearby called the ladies' parlor. She had her cook make the meal, but she brought it out herself. This way, she could make sure they had complete privacy for what she thought would be a good conversation with her new counsel. They had just sat down when he started talking softly while opening his napkin. Why did you hide what happened to your husband? Stephen Fitzgerald asked. Once he set his napkin on his lap, his eyes focused on her. Samantha felt shocked. He spoke like he knew all the answers, but that couldn't be true. She thought about denying it, but he stopped her with what he said next. You found your husband. The first thing you did was call for help. Only then did you really see what was happening, and it became clear. Unlike the police, you understood the reason behind it. You knew why your husband chose to end his life. You two had always been very close. It was his secret, but you both knew it. You had very little time, and that may be why things look strange, Stephen said, keeping his eyes focused on hers. When he finished speaking, she made herself look away. You can't really know that. He continued as if he hadn't noticed her response. I guess you loved him a lot. After all, you were married to him for 27 years. His cheating really hurt, but it didn't make you love him any less. Yes, I loved him, more than he realized. Oh, I think you're mistaken, because if that were true, why would he have written those last words to you? That can't be true. You can't be sure about that. Stephen let out a deep breath like he had a heavy load to carry. You don't need to tell me everything, but you shouldn't lie to me for your own good, he said, then waited. Samantha, still looking away, nodded and asked, How did you find out? You said it yourself, he replied. She quickly turned to look at him. For the first time, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We teach police how to collect information, not how to understand it. They mostly finished high school. The technicians are just people with special skills. He turned an empty wine glass in his left hand as he thought about what to say. It was all in their reports. They just couldn't see it. But to be fair, there is one important fact they missed. Let's call it the Wheatmore family secret. What should I do now? She asked, looking up at him with worried eyes. The clear choice is to show the truth behind the old lie. Everyone involved is gone, so who would get hurt? He said. I can't do that. I have children. They are grown now, but still. And I must think of Stuart's memory. We had 27 years together. Those years were special. Samantha stopped and took a deep breath. I can't just walk away. I owe him that, she finished. Well, you're putting me in a tough spot. This is really uncomfortable for me. After all, innocence is the biggest weight a defense can bear, Stephen said with his first real smile of the night. Your Honor, this request is unacceptable, she said. The she was Linda Siegel, often called Mighty Mouse. She always wore 6-inch heels, which made her 4'7" height reach 5'1". She looked like she had long legs and a big voice, with a head that seemed a little too big for her small body. She wore her pinstripe suit skirt just a little longer than what was considered right. The suit was snug and shaped her figure in a way that caught the eye. You wouldn't call her beautiful, but she had a charm that made men act foolishly. She was smart, though, and she was determined to go after the fancy lawyer for the defense. "We have had so many delays in this case," she said. She was mostly talking to people who agreed with her. Judge Adam Grant was a black man in his 40s. He was the adopted son of the Grant family from Westchester, who were well known in the area. As the only black member of a wealthy white family, he had picked up all the biases of his surroundings, along with some that came from his skin color. Judge Grant thought the young Jewish assistant district attorney, who wore an uncomfortably short skirt, was okay. But he found the Irish defense lawyer, with his good looks and fancy suit, completely unacceptable. To the judge, he represented the parts of society that take advantage of others. Hearing his smooth, clear voice annoyed the judge. "You make a good point, Miss Siegel. I don't see why the change of lawyers at the last minute should hold up this trial, but the clerk just told me that the court's schedule is very busy, and we won't find an open day for a trial until next month. That gives you nearly 5 weeks, Mr. Fitzgerald. I suggest you make good use of this time," the judge said. Stephen stood up and replied, "Thank you, Your Honor. That's very kind of you." The judge caught the hint of sarcasm in his voice, but there wasn't much he could do about it. He promised himself that there would be another time and place for everything. Linda, on the other hand, was very happy. Getting a 30-day delay was the least they could do in this situation. Foxy Fitzgerald had received barely more than he deserved. Linda had checked out the new defense lawyer. He was clever and liked to play tricks. She knew she had to be cautious. Usually her strategy was to win over the jury. Being a small woman made it much easier for her to do so. She let the strong, skilled defense lawyers do their work while she focused on building her case. Step by step, she presented her proof, and this time she had everything she needed. Still, she was careful. Foxy's reputation made her cautious. Plus, he was so small that pretending to be weaker than him wouldn't work unless he became bold. He was so handsome that all the women on the jury would be charmed by him. She had planned to fill the jury with women because of the case she had against Samantha Wheatmore. But now, she had to think again. "I'd wish you good luck next time, but that wouldn't be true," she told Stephen, trying not to show a small smile of satisfaction. "Well, I got what I needed." "See you next month," he said. He looked annoyingly sure of himself, and Linda decided she would do whatever it took to win. "Darn it, darn it, darn it," Linda Siegel whispered to herself, stopping just before she said it out loud. She was upset. Foxy Fitzgerald had surprised her in every way possible. He had handled the case honestly. For every expert she brought in, he had 2 of his own. He had spent his 5 weeks wisely and used his client's large fortune to hire the best and most impressive witnesses. By now, the jurors could almost take a test on forensics themselves, but they were as puzzled as she was. The case was about whether it was murder or suicide. The defendant had found the body in the family barn. Stuart Peabody Wheatmore had died from a bullet to the head. The bullet came from an A1911 Colt gun that had belonged to his father. The gun was stored in a cabinet that only he and the accused could open. The police did not find a note explaining why he would take his own life, and there was no clear reason for it. Stuart, it turned out, had a girlfriend who was much younger than him. She was over 25 years his junior. On the day he died, he met her and gave her a fancy ruby ring. Stuart had also withdrawn $2 million from a family trust fund in a cashier's check. The Wheatmores had a special legal agreement to keep Stuart's money safe in case they got divorced. Linda believed that after Stuart met with another woman, he called his wife to ask for a divorce. This idea was supported by the fact that after talking to his wife, Samantha Wheatmore, Stuart hurried home, driving too fast and getting a ticket along the way. Linda said that Samantha came home, got a gun, and shot her husband when she saw him in the horse barn. This likely happened after they had a fight about a $2 million check that had gone missing. Linda began her case by telling the jury that the check was not there. She believed the only reason for this was that Samantha, in a fit of anger, had torn it up. This was the only explanation that made sense to Linda, and she hoped it would make sense to the jury, too. She had chosen this jury very carefully while her opponent watched with a relaxed look. There were only 3 women on the jury. This was a lucky break because, by the end of the first day of the trial, all of them were enchanted by Stephen Fitzgerald. She couldn't blame them. He was handsome and very charming. He had a shy, sweet nature that made it hard for a woman to resist him. He also moved with a kind of grace that caught everyone's attention. She had to push aside her feelings and remember that he was a dishonest lawyer, someone she thought was the worst kind of person. She had included 4 black men on the jury, which wasn't her usual choice. Normally, they often supported the person accused. However, with Judge Adam Grant on the case, she thought it might work in her favor. Judge Grant clearly did not like the defense lawyer. Linda believed this would influence the black men on the jury. It did, but not in the way she expected. Grant was really stuck up. Foxy noticed this and decided to use it to his advantage. He pretended to be the poor underdog. Linda couldn't believe what she was seeing. Foxy changed into the poor boy from the tough neighborhood, battling the wealthy judge. Even the men on the jury were cheering for him. Linda adjusted her shoes to make them more comfortable. She always showed respect to Foxy. This was something new for her. Normally, she was the stylish underdog. She wasn't sure how to act tough and still make it work. In the end, she had no choice. She had to call her friend. She was the last person who could help. Elizabeth Martin, who preferred to be called Beth, stepped up to speak. She was a lovely young woman and worked as a nurse at the hospital. It was there that she met Stuart when he came in for help with his shoulder after hurting it while playing polo. He was 55 years old, and she was just 28. But as she talked about him, she said he was still a good-looking and lively man for someone his age. It was love at first sight, at least for Linda. Linda thought that Beth might have some issues with authority figures. The district attorney's office had looked into Beth's past and found that she was very attached to the late Mr. Wheatmore. They also noticed that she did not like Mrs. Wheatmore at all. This made her a risky witness. A smart lawyer could make her seem unreliable, but Linda had trained her well. Linda was confident during questioning. She shared everything about the situation with Beth, making it clear that neither she nor the dead man were perfect. They both had their flaws. They were involved in a secret relationship. But after 2 years of this hidden romance, Stuart gave her a ring with rubies and diamonds. Beth was planning to say that he had asked her to marry him. Linda understood this was a bit of a stretch. Beth could talk about their feelings for each other, but not about an actual marriage proposal. Given Stuart's current marriage, Linda knew he would probably want to take his time with that. This was Linda's main idea, the core of her argument. "Do they call you Beth?" Fitzgerald asked, starting his questioning. "Yes, and I believe they call you Foxy," Beth replied. This caught Fitzgerald off guard. It was the first time he seemed unsure during the whole trial. Linda couldn't help but smile. She hadn't practiced this with Beth, but she had mentioned his nickname several times while getting ready. Fitzgerald turned and gave Linda a disappointed look. The people in the courtroom giggled softly. Linda just shrugged her shoulders. Beth first met Mr. Wheatmore. She thought he was charming. He had a smile that lit up a room. She was mesmerized by his confidence and how he seemed to know just what to say. Foxy guided the jury through their time together, highlighting Stuart's strong qualities. At each moment, Foxy painted Stuart as a good man who found himself in a tough spot. He described how Stuart cared for Beth, showing her kindness that made her feel special. Beth, in his words, was just a naive young woman in love, caught in a complicated situation. When Miss Beth first saw Mr. Wheatmore, she believed he was someone special. He captured her heart with his charm, making her feel valued and admired. Siegel asked if you understood that what you and Stuart were doing was wrong. You replied yes. But did you really think so? You cared for him deeply. How could that be bad? I don't know. People say it's wrong, but it felt good, you answered. Of course it did. But Stuart had his own problems, he said. Yes. He was a really good person, and he cared about you. Yes, he promised that he would always care for me. Fitzgerald slightly turned to face the jury. Did he say those words on the last day? Foxy took a moment, then looked directly at the jury. He said, "Remember, I will always care for you." "Yes," Beth replied before Linda could stand up to object. But Linda stayed still, watching as Foxy turned to her. The jury, as usual during questioning, was looking at the person asking the questions. But now, they turned to see Linda get up. Just as fast, Foxy looked back at the witness. "Our Miss Siegel wants to stop the use of the word remember. But that was the word Stewart used when he gave you the ring and the check for $2 million, wasn't it?" Foxy's question made Beth freeze. She started to stutter as she tried to answer, and then she just broke down in tears. In that moment, Foxy was standing by the witness stand with a kind hand on Beth's shoulder. "It's okay, Beth. You cared about him." "We know," Foxy said softly. Linda stood still as Beth spoke up. "She took his life, I'm sure of it. He gave me the money, but she took his life." Beth pointed at Samantha Wheatmore, who sat tall and stiff like a statue. However, tears were streaming down her cheeks and dripping from her chin. The jury noticed this, and Linda saw them look over at Foxy. He looked unhappy as he said, "Stewart Wheatmore was a man who cared and did what was right, caught in a hard situation." The trial went on for 3 more days, finishing with closing statements, but Linda felt like she had lost. The jury understood that the man loved her husband, and that her husband had given $2 million to his girlfriend before leaving her. Why did he take his own life? Stephen, always clever, had a poem to share. Every time Richard Corey went into town, we people on the sidewalk noticed him. He dressed like a true gentleman, looking sharp and fit. He always looked nice, and when he spoke, he felt warm and friendly. But still, his simple good morning made our hearts race, and he seemed to shine as he walked. He was wealthy, much richer than a king, and he knew how to charm everyone around him. We thought he had everything we wished for, making us long to be in his shoes. So we kept working, hoping for better days, going without good meals, and grumbling about what little food we had. Then one peaceful summer evening, Richard Corey went home and ended his own life. That is how Foxy Fitzgerald ended his case before the jury, quoting the poem by Edwin Arlington Robinson with a shrug. The jury took a long time to decide, over 2 days, but finally they said he was not guilty. Linda was kind. She noticed that Foxy, after getting a quick and slightly awkward hug from his client, was trying to leave quietly. So she walked over to him. "If we go out through the jury room, there's a hallway that leads to the back. It goes to the detention area and where the prisoners enter," she said. "Thank you," he replied. "The cameras are giving me a headache and I'm feeling a bit sick," he said. He paused to grab the black and white notebook. That was all he used during the trial. He never let it out of his sight. Linda often imagined what it would be like to take a quick look at that book. She took him out through the back of the courtroom, down a long hallway to an elevator. They rode down to the floor with the detention cells. Then she led him down a back staircase to a door that opened into a small parking lot. The lot had no cars parked in it, except for a red Miata. Without stopping, she walked toward the Miata. "Come on, I'll give you a ride," she said. Linda wore tall shoes, and she swayed her hips as she walked. From behind, she sensed that he was enjoying the view. She had not won the case. She felt she deserved a little reward. Sitting in her small car, she asked, "Want to grab some dinner?" "I'm not feeling great," he replied. "You should have some chicken soup. It will help your stomach, and I know a place that makes the best." She drove her small car through the security gate and onto the busy road. She didn't notice the other cars much as she drove a few blocks to the highway entrance. Then, she pressed down hard on the gas pedal, not caring about the speed limit or how her passenger might feel. 20 minutes later, she stopped in front of a group of garden apartments. "Is there a restaurant here?" he asked. "No, it's my apartment, and my grandmother's chicken and dumpling soup. Come on, you really need it," she said. The apartment was small and a bit clumsily arranged. It belonged to a woman who cared more about being practical and comfortable than anything fancy. "Sit down. I'll have the soup ready in no time," she said. Stephen found a chair and put his notebook on a small table beside him. She served the soup at a little table right off the kitchen, in the big room that was used for eating, relaxing, and having fun. "So how does it feel to help guilty people?" she asked. "Is that what we're going to talk about?" "I'm sorry, but I can't," he replied. I thought we were just two people for a second. But you're right, we're lawyers, she said with a sigh. Surely we can talk about something else at dinner, he suggested. Of course, she replied, standing up from her chair. She moved behind him and leaned in close. For instance, how many times do you think we can be together? She asked softly. The morning light woke Linda. She always arranged the bedroom curtains to let the sun shine on her side of the bed. The noise woke her up before her roommates. It gave her a chance to feel a little nicer in the morning. As a young woman who tried to look good, she knew that every little bit helped. The bathroom was far away from her room. Many would find that annoying, but Linda used it to her advantage. She quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake Stephen. 20 minutes later, after a nice shower, brushing her teeth and putting on a little makeup, she came out of the bathroom. She checked to see if he was still asleep. It was time to make breakfast, she thought. Stephen Fitzgerald had been an interesting and special partner. For one thing, he did not rush things, which made her curious at times if he would ever finish. She had given it her all. At first, she really tried to make him happy. Linda felt a bit nervous because of his wife being in the picture. Linda never thought of herself as the kind of woman who would come between someone else. This was the first time she had ever knowingly been with another woman's partner. But as she looked into Foxy, she couldn't help but come across Susan Singleton. Susan was attractive and had a strong reputation to match. Linda didn't feel sorry for Susan at all. If you behave like that, when you have the kindest and most handsome man as your husband, well, forget you. Or maybe forget him. This thought made her smile as she walked across the living room toward the kitchen. One moment, her feet were moving, and then they suddenly stopped. She stood still, staring. There, on her end table, was the black and white notebook. She glanced back at the open bedroom door. He was still sleeping. She really shouldn't open that book. It wasn't right, and it felt wrong to her. She promised herself she wouldn't look inside it. Never, but just a quick peek wouldn't hurt. She turned a few pages. His handwriting was the neatest and roundest she had ever seen. It tilted a little to the left, but it was so clear and easy to read. "Oh, my gosh," she whispered. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked in his soft, kind voice. She felt completely caught. Her mind felt dizzy, her hands trembled, and her legs felt weak. The book slipped from her fingers as he wrapped his arms around her. He gently helped her sit down. She couldn't find the words. She could only gaze into his blue eyes. She remembered wondering about that look he had, the one that seemed to look deep inside her. Could he truly understand her? Was that the reason? "I'll make some tea," he said softly. It took her all her effort to lift the book again. She was still holding it when he returned with the tea. He took his notebook back and gently placed a warm mug of tea in her hands. "Some things are better left unknown," he said. She took a big sip of her tea. With her left hand, she reached out and held his. "Thank you. I'm not sure how I can repay you," she said. "It's just a cup of tea," he replied. "Don't say that. You saved me and Samantha Wheatmore." "I couldn't deal with that," she said. "I was just doing my job like you did yours," he replied. She looked down at her tea, watching the little waves made by her shaking hands. "No, I was just trying to win no matter what. I didn't think about what might happen. You did something amazing. I brought a tough problem and you solved it, thank goodness. I was so close," she said, her voice breaking as tears started to fall. "Well, I've never seen anything like this before. Usually I'm the one feeling sad the next morning," he joked. She chuckled, unable to help herself, but then she got serious. "But why?" "I guess it's love. And there are kids. They're all grown up now, but still. It's wild. She could have ended up in jail, maybe for a long time." Stephen didn't seem to have an answer. His face told the story. He was just the lawyer. But that didn't quite feel right. He was a very skilled lawyer. Samantha had won. She had kept the Wheatmore family secret hidden. She had put everything on the line for that dream. "How did you figure it out?" she asked softly. "It's pretty clear. You just had to take a good look. You were so focused on the details of the case and the drama with the lovers and the news that you missed the truth. Plus, married men don't get killed by their wives over relationships with much younger women. It needs more fire than someone over 50 usually has. No, Murder comes from darkness, and marriage is built on love. Sometimes trouble can lead to results that are the same. It still doesn't feel like it's worth it. His mother got involved with someone else and ended up expecting a child. Now she's gone, and so is her husband. You still don't understand. Stuart Peabody Wheatmore Sr. was not who everyone thought he was. Stuart Peabody Wheatmore Jr. is the child of an unknown stable worker. Stuart held that truth inside him for as long as he could. Before he died, he wrote about it. The letter was meant for Samantha, but she chose to burn it. The good wife kept the family name safe. It was a silly thing to do, but as the saying goes, love makes us all act foolishly, he said. Both big and small, she answered, completing the saying. She stepped into his embrace. Let's find a way to help him feel better this morning, she said. 2 hours later, he was on the train going north. A dozen missed calls showed him that everyone was trying to reach him. So was Susan. She had sent 3 messages. The first was upset that he had avoided the cameras again. The second said she had fixed it, and he would have interviews on the morning news. The third message asked where he was. There was a touch of doubt and jealousy in her voice. Stephen Fitzgerald sat on the train going north and watched the Hudson River move south, just as it had for a long time, even before people came to North America. The river stayed the same, but Stephen's life was about to change in a big way. He couldn't change what was going to happen any more than he could change what had already happened. Destiny had already shaped his life. He took a deep breath and let the train's gentle motion carry him into sleep. "Happy Christmas," Tony Greco said. "Happy Christmas," Susan DeVoe Singleton replied. She had just walked into the Red Room of the Capitol building. A small lunch was ready for the governor's close team in Albany. The main office Christmas party was set for the next Sunday night in Manhattan. But the team in Albany decided to have a small party on Thursday afternoon in the governor's Capitol office. Susan, the new public relations person, was invited. She came to be polite and brought some chocolates from Cruz's confectionery. Tony was quick to say hello to her, and there was no way for her to avoid him. She had been trying to dodge him for days because he wanted a clear answer to his marriage proposal. She tried everything to change his mind, but he wouldn't listen. "I can't serve you any alcohol, sorry. It's against the rules, but the food is great," Tony said. "I'm okay. I just came to say happy holidays to the staff. Is the governor here?" "He's in a meeting with the speaker, but he'll come by later. He's heading to the city tonight. I'll be here until tomorrow. Want to grab a drink later?" Susan had heard a rumor that the speaker was leaving his job. Jose Martin Perez, the leader of the group in charge, was getting ready to take the big job of speaker in the state assembly. Kincaid did not want Perez to be the speaker, but it looked like Perez would win because he had strong support from the influential Black and Hispanic groups. "Sorry, I have another Christmas party at the Fort Orange Club for Stephen's law firm," she said. "Do you really have to go to that? You know how these law firms are, and they are discussing making him a partner after his recent success." "I understand. It seems that helping bad people escape has its benefits. But why do you have to leave now?" The reason she had to leave was clear. She was worried that her husband was being unfaithful. There was a real chance she could lose him. She needed to make her presence felt as Mrs. Stephen Fitzgerald. That meant being by her husband's side whenever she could and proving that she was important. Susan held back a sharp response and replied, "It's just what a wife does." Just then, the governor's assistant, Carrie Wilson, came over and said, "Happy holidays. Thank you for coming to our small gathering. I know you have a lot to do." Carrie then took Susan to meet the parts of the governor's team she hadn't met yet. "Thank you," Susan said. "It's nice to have someone to help with the introductions. I really want to meet everyone." "Tony was going to introduce you, but you seem to have caught his attention," the other person replied with a smile. "I suppose I have," Susan said, laughing a little. "I don't mean to," Susan sighed. Carrie smiled and tried not to laugh. "If only we all had problems like that." "Be careful what you wish for, girl," Susan said, giving a small laugh back. "You're right," Carrie replied. "I don't think I want to be a married woman trying to say no to Tony's marriage proposal." "You know," Susan said, feeling both surprised and a bit worried that the governor's assistant was aware of this. "Don't worry, he only told me and I won't tell anyone. He can be a big-headed jerk, but I hear that's part of why people like him." Carrie felt worried. Tony was not really a friend, but he was a co-worker and they got along well. The problem was that Tony was not thinking straight when it came to Susan. He had always had a big ego, but there was a reason for it. As a political worker, there were not many who were better than him, and women were often attracted to his looks and charm. Carrie worried that Susan was too good for Greco and that she was married as well. Carrie also knew that Tony didn't handle rejection well. Just then, the governor showed up, and everyone turned their attention to him. Later on, Tony finally got a chance to talk with Susan in his small office. She seemed upset and said, "You told Carrie Wilson about your plan?" "Yes, I wanted her opinion on how the governor might respond," he replied. "And what did she say?" "She thought it was a bad idea. She's a smart girl. It's not a good idea at all. I'm already married. Don't you see that makes what you want impossible? I don't understand why you won't just leave him. Leave him for what reason? What has he done wrong? You don't need a reason anymore. This is the 21st century and we live in New York. But I'm Catholic. I come from the DeVoe family on my mom's side, remember? My dad would stop talking to me and my mom, she would be very upset. And we also have to think about the governor. He would not feel good about having that kind of problem start his campaign for president. How do you think your offer to a married woman would be received in Iowa? But I care about you. And I care about you too. What we have is special. Don't ruin it. We can continue like this, but there's one thing. One thing? You need to be careful. I promised my mother I would have a child someday. I'm stopping my birth control at the end of this month. I hope to be pregnant in 2 or 3 months, so we can return to how things used to be. Are you serious? You want to have his baby? I'm his wife. It needs to happen eventually, she replied, not mentioning that if she became pregnant, it would surely put an end to any other romances her husband might have. Stephen would never leave a pregnant woman alone. While she thought this, Tony took her by the arms and pulled her close. You must be crazy if you think I'm going to let you leave me to have his baby. Please, you're hurting me, she said. Just then, the door opened and Carrie Wilson stood there. Tony, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the governor wants to see you before he leaves, Carrie said. Tony paused, feeling stuck between helping his partner and going to see the political leader. In the end, the governor's call was more important. He released Susan and left his office in a hurry. Carrie stayed behind. Are you okay? She asked Susan. Yes, but he scared me for a second, Susan replied. I'm sure he wouldn't harm you. Still, it might be best if you weren't here when he returns, Carrie suggested, unsure if she really believed it. Tony could be unpredictable when it involved Susan. You're right, Susan agreed. I'll be going. Carrie watched Susan walk away and thought about whether she should tell the governor he might have a big problem with his team. At the Fort Orange Club, Susan was being fun and charming, just like a really beautiful woman can be. Still, she had stayed close to her husband's side all night. She waved goodbye to her husband as he left to get more drinks. This gave her a chance to talk to Mark Tolan, the managing partner of the firm, by themselves. This party is great, she said to Mark. The older man smiled, feeling good about her compliment. He stood in the middle of the room with this lovely woman who had just sent her husband to the bar. The Fort Orange Club really knows how to host a party, he replied. I made sure the partners paid for this. It shows how we've become the leading law firm in the Capital District. Like I said, where else could we celebrate with our team and special guests? I just wish the governor could have joined us, Tolan said, making it clear that he expected his partners to meet that level of formality. Susan found the man's high hopes a little funny, but she kept her smile to herself. I'm sure the governor would have come if he could, but he's really busy these days. He's a well-known person, if you catch my drift, she said, hinting at Kincaid's plans to run for the White House. Yes, I understand. And I must say, he couldn't have chosen anyone better than you to support him. Thank you, but tonight I'm just Stephen Fitzgerald's wife, she said, trying to focus the conversation where she wanted it to go. Of course, but there's nothing usual about Stephen. He's the exciting new member of our lawsuit team and the latest partner at Rosewood and Associates. I hope the cost to join wasn't too much for you? Mark Tolan asked. Susan understood how partnership payments worked. After all, she was a partner in a much larger PR firm than small Albany's Rosewood. If she hadn't been married to Stephen, she knew he would have struggled to afford the $250,000 needed to join. The company agreed to let him pay the amount in small payments each month for 2 years. They would take the money out of his paycheck every 2 weeks and check the payments each December. The strange thing was that, as he became a partner, he would not get a regular salary anymore. Instead, he would rely on the company's accountant and the managing partner, Mark Tolan, for his income from then on. Their guess about his monthly earnings would be important. "Dear Mark, you don't think we rely on Stephen's money for our living costs, do you?" Susan asked with a polite smile. "Well, no, I didn't think so, but I hope our little money matters didn't cause you any trouble. I wouldn't mind if I was sure that my husband's pay was, let's say, reasonable. I would really dislike reaching next December and discovering we were short on money. It would be awkward to ask my father for a loan." Tolan definitely understood. Many of his co-workers often argued for a bigger share of the money they earned. Some even earned more than they should have and had to return some of it. Next year, thanks to Stephen Fitzgerald, was expected to be a great year. Most of his co-workers were already planning to ask for a larger share at the January meeting. However, he knew that Mrs. Fitzgerald wanted her husband to stick to a strict budget. It was not a bad request. "Well, being modest might work if Stephen doesn't mind," he said. Tolan knew he couldn't upset his main source of income. "Oh, I promise you that Stephen doesn't understand money matters. He won't notice a change unless you tell him, but look, here he comes with our drinks. That's all for now." Stephen had come back with their drinks. He was having a pretty rough time, just like the young people stuck at the party with their older co-workers. But he wasn't a young worker anymore, and he didn't feel young either. Susan was up to something. She was planning again. He cared for her a lot, and mostly he found her schemes funny. Even though she was a really smart woman, she was completely clueless about some things. He knew that Susan was smarter than him in many ways, but she didn't have his cleverness. Susan didn't trick her husband. He was aware that she was not completely loyal. It was surprising for a woman as beautiful as her, who had such a strong desire for romance, to stay with just one person. You often saw this with famous actresses. They changed partners frequently, moving from one man to another. Men didn't always behave the same way. For every good-looking actor with many wives, there was an equally charming guy who stayed happily married to one woman for many years. Stephen thought the pressure on women was just too much. This was especially true for his wife. With her high social status and great wealth, she seemed safe from the usual results of her choices. But her position also put her in a world where rules about right and wrong were weak, like in ancient Rome. What chance did his wife have to stay true? She was shaped by both her surroundings and her experiences. Yet she was something special. She had a unique innocence about her. She felt no guilt because she didn't see how her actions affected other people's opinions. Having someone you care about didn't matter much unless others knew about it. Being the center of gossip felt good. It showed that you mattered. People thought it was wrong to have a secret relationship if you were married, but they saw it more as a social mistake than a true wrongdoing. Susan was a good person in her class. She always tried to help others and worked hard at her job. She wanted to succeed for her own happiness. She didn't use drugs or drink too much. She made sure her husband had everything he needed. If you didn't think about her jealousy, Susan was the kind of woman everyone would admire. Stephen knew all too well about her jealousy, and it was a problem. Meanwhile, Stephen was deeply in love with his wife. He loved her for who she was inside, not just her looks. Talking to women had always been tough for him, especially when they had nothing to share. Stephen knew he was one of those good-looking guys who could be pretty dull. He felt very shy around everyone, but even more so around women. He didn't care about anything beyond trying out new ideas in his job. He wasn't as clever with the law as Jimmy O'Reilly or Pat Sullivan. The confusing world of legal rules just didn't appeal to him. He was a writer, director, and actor, and his stage was a courtroom. Susan was the first woman he had ever felt really at ease with. He had kept his marriage promises until he made a mistake. He was still trying to understand what it was about the young prosecutor, Linda Siegel, that made it so easy for her to get through his barriers. From the very first time he saw her, he felt a strange pull toward her. It wasn't desire. Maybe it was the special connection that two like-minded people had for each other. They were like the two sides of the same coin. When they were together, everything felt comfortable. They shared a deep interest that took all their attention. They could talk about trial tricks for hours, laughing at each other's stories. Linda was completely dedicated to her work in trials. He understood, without needing to be told, that her social life was filled with brief and unimportant meetings. Nothing mattered more than the courtroom and getting ready for it. No trick was too mean or dishonest. Winning was all that counted because she believed she was always right. When she realized how wrong she had been about the Wheatmore case and how much she had fooled herself, she nearly lost control. Stephen struggled with the heavy weight of a guilty secret. He felt a strange connection with Linda as she struggled with her feelings about what happened with Mrs. Wheatmore. Maybe that was why he gave in to her charm and wanted to keep seeing her, even though he knew his wife was starting to notice something was off. It troubled him that he was being unfaithful to Susan. Part of him thought he was justified since she had her own secrets, but deep down it didn't feel right. Love was a difficult part of Stephen's life. Female secretaries and clients smiled at him. Court clerks playfully teased him. Some men looked at him in a way that made him uncomfortable. This last look sent a shiver down his spine and made him feel uneasy inside. Deep down, Stephen Fitzgerald understood that he could never manage being with two women at once. As for Susan, she had always felt jealous. Like many women who cheat in relationships, she didn't want to give her partner the same freedom she enjoyed. Even though she was beautiful, she had her own worries and a deep fear of being left alone. She could not stand the idea of her husband being with another woman, just as she found it hard to stop seeing other men herself. It's strange how people work. A woman who likes to date many men often wants her partner to only be with her, while a woman who wants one partner might sometimes be okay with a man who has more than one. Stephen had let Susan down, and he knew she was not completely sure about him, but she was definitely suspicious. In the past few weeks, she had been doing everything she could to keep him close and to make it hard for him to stray. She didn't want him to have much time alone, away from work. Her worry about losing him pushed her actions. He couldn't help but think about how she was managing her own feelings and actions. That was until tonight. "Is something the matter?" he asked. "Not at all. Why would anything be wrong?" His wife replied, "You seem a bit off, as if something is bothering you." She couldn't tell her husband that earlier that day, someone had gotten too close to crossing a line with her, but that was what troubled her. It wasn't the first time a man had acted too aggressively towards her, but she had always managed to stand up for herself before. This time was different. It wasn't just that she felt drawn to Tony, he was also a strong supporter of the governor. She didn't want to upset him, but she couldn't allow him to hurt her. "I was speaking with Mark Tolan about your pay in the future," she said, hiding how worried she really felt. "Oh, is that an issue? We never relied on my money before." "That's true, and I don't want you to worry about it now. I'll make sure everything is okay. I want you to remember that and how much I really love my wonderful husband," she said, leaning down to give him a kiss. "Hey, save it for later, you two. This is a family-friendly event," said Laura Sullivan. Stephen smiled at Laura and asked, "Is Pat here?" meaning Laura's husband. "Sorry, he's not here," she replied. "I'm here with Frank Patterson from our company." Stephen's smile faded. He knew Patterson, and not just from what people said. His wife didn't know the whole story, but her sister Mary had been found by her husband with Patterson. After that, Mary's marriage fell apart. It was not easy for Patterson either. He lost his job and ended up in the small town of Albany. People said he was unhappy about losing the woman he cared for back to her husband and family. Stephen could not figure out a man like Patterson. He must have known what kind of man Mary Singleton was married to. Jason Sweeney was not weak. He was really good at math and a talented amateur boxer. If the story was correct, Patterson had felt the force of Jason's punch, and it sure hurt. If someone has a wandering eye, why go after those who are already married? And more importantly, why take such big risks? Susan just smiled and thought about when her friend would finally admit to what she clearly wanted. She realized that Laura had a crush on her boss. Laura was very interested in the deal the attractive tall man was offering. Noticing that Laura seemed like she wanted to say something, Susan said, "I need to go to the restroom. Want to join me?" As the two women walked away, Stephen felt uneasy. He knew his friend Pat well. He might have ignored Laura's wild behavior before they got married, but he would not accept it after they tied the knot. This guy, Patterson, had a bad name. He was a professional in his field, but he was one of those people who relied on his race for success rather than his skills. He also believed he could charm any woman he wanted with his smooth talk. Laura being with him was trouble. Pursuing Laura Sullivan was the last thing any wise man would do. If he gets caught, he's going to be in big trouble. Stephen knew his friend Pat Sullivan wouldn't just let that slide. "Come on, talk to me. That's what you want, right?" Susan asked. "I suppose so. I really need someone to support me. Frank has made it clear that if I want to be a partner this January, I need to take our relationship to the next level," Laura replied. "Sounds like a good reason to go after what you want. But I'm concerned about Pat." "Why's that?" "He doesn't need to know, and if he does, just say you did it for him. He's not like Stephen. He gets really angry. I'm worried about how he'll react." "He's not a bad person. Trust me, I've dealt with someone like that today. Show your husband a lot of love so he feels safe and cared for. If he has any doubts, he won't make a fuss. After you enjoy your time with Frank, you can move on from him quickly. I figured out that having them stay too long makes them think they can do more than they should." "It seems like you have a challenge," Laura said. "Definitely, it's a big challenge." Just then, Tony Greco, who had drunk too much, barged into the Rosewood firm's Christmas party. He had the invitation meant for the governor that he had tricked from the governor's office secretary. He wasn't too drunk to stay alert, and when he saw Stephen Fitzgerald, he made sure to smile. Stephen did not smile back. He put up with Tony but didn't feel the need to pretend to enjoy his company. Luckily, Frank Patterson stepped in front of Tony before he could get to Fitzgerald. Patterson was focused on pushing another idea from the Black and Hispanic caucus, even though all the lawmakers had left for the holidays. Susan had just enough time to get back before Tony could talk to Stephen. "Looks like your friend Greco is on a mission," Stephen said, noticing him coming. Susan's face went white. She did not want to fight in front of her husband's friends. As Greco got closer, she leaned in and whispered, "Please, I don't want any trouble. Can you give us some room?" Stephen wanted to stay where he was, but he could see that his wife was really worried. He had faced this kind of situation before. Susan was ending things with Greco. Her relationships always seemed to reach a close. It happened with all her partners. She would break up with them, and he knew that this must be painful. Some of them even tried to blame him for the end. Susan didn't realize it, but Stephen had been spoken to by several of the men she had turned down. The other men shared their feelings in a quiet and awkward way. One person had even cried on Stephen's shoulder while the hurt husband tried to say that with his wife, it was not meant to hurt anyone. That's just who she is. This was a big problem when trying to win the heart of a married woman. They usually go back to their husbands if they can. Susan was scared that Tony would tell everyone about her secret relationship. Stephen saw that there was a serious chance of Tony causing a public outburst. He knew how much this would affect his wife. That kind of embarrassment in public would hurt her a lot, and a scandal with the governor's team would ruin her job. Susan might finally be facing the trouble she had coming. "Please, please don't cause a fuss," Susan pleaded. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Just step away for a moment and let me take care of this." Stephen glanced from the coming Tony to his worried wife. As much as he wanted to help, he couldn't act. Stephen shook his head and walked away. Susan hurried over to Tony. "We need to talk," she said as she reached him. "Yes, we do," he replied, looking as Stephen walked away. It made Tony feel better that her husband seemed to be avoiding him. Susan took Tony's arm and guided him toward the lounge for club members. The evening manager noticed the couple walk into the private lounge. He did not stop them because he knew they worked for the governor. As soon as they found a quiet corner, Susan spoke up. "What are you doing here?" "I came to say sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. You surprised me. I don't want things to end like this." "I don't want that either," she replied, though she wasn't sure if she truly meant it. She knew she had to end things with him tonight. "Then see me later," he said. "I can't. I'm with my husband." Tony felt like shouting at her to stop this silly talk. Her husband had no idea, but he said in a calm voice, "After this is done, let's meet at my place around midnight." "No, let's meet at the Lathan Inn at 12:30, she replied, thinking about how long it would take them to get home and how she would come up with a reason to leave again. He nodded and leaned in to kiss her, but she gently moved away. "Not here," she said, then quickly went back to the party. When she returned to the gathering at the law firm, only a few people were looking at her. Some people might wonder about her, but she didn't worry about what others said. There would always be talk. Even if she were the purest woman in New York, people would still talk. What others whispered didn't matter. What was said openly was what counted. Stephen grabbed her arm gently. "Should we leave now? I'm feeling tired, and I think I've talked enough for one night. Let's say our goodbyes first, and then we can go." "I'm tired too," she said. On her way home, she thought about what to say to Tony. She wanted to be kind, but she knew she had to end things before they went too far. The Cardinal was enjoying his tea. The new housekeeper was very good at making tea and handling other personal chores. The Cardinal had never gotten used to the American habit of drinking coffee after dinner. As a young priest, he came from Ireland to help with the ongoing shortage of priests in the American church. He still held some views from his homeland. America struggled to find enough priests. It was a country that often seemed more focused on money than on faith. This is why there weren't enough priests, and why the church worked hard to keep its services running. The people in America contributed money to the church, and that was what Rome wanted from them. When it came to beliefs, the place where the Cardinal was did not matter, but money was a different story. Money was the main topic during the talk after dinner between the Cardinal and his main financial advisor, Monsignor Douglas Morlock. Monsignor Morlock was very smart about money. He was a loyal and skilled manager of the church's funds. Like any good caretaker, he looked after the finances with great care. There were wolves that wanted to harm the church, and they had to be chased away. The sheep were not always willing and often needed help to get to the place where they were sheared. The shy sheep and the nearby wolves were the topic of discussion after dinner. "Douglas, what are we going to do about Maryann McManus?" someone asked. "I'm sorry, but she doesn't want to help us," Douglas replied. "Are you certain she has the file?" "Nothing is ever completely sure, but it makes sense to think she does." "Tell me more," the Cardinal encouraged. "We know that the file was kept in Bishop McManus's safe, which had strong security. The bishop personally showed me the safe when we took the file out of our possession, following our lawyer's advice. If we hadn't felt it was safe, we would never have put the file there. When I looked inside the safe after Tom McManus passed away, the file was missing, along with other important legal papers he had. However, all his personal items were still there, like his Rolex watch, rings, some gold coins, and over $5,000 in cash. A thief would have taken the valuable items and left behind the papers. The McManus woman likely left her treasures behind because she knew the real worth was in the papers that would prove she owned everything," the gentleman finished. "This woman wants Thomas's estate?" the Cardinal asked, clearly upset by women's greed in general. "Yes, she has a will that was made but never filed. Documents for the bishop's lands in both Thomas and Maryann McManus's names, and copies of trusts for her kids. It was an old trick. The papers were shown to the bishop's wife and her kids, but they were never saved in any legal way. There was only one copy made, and it was kept away from everyone except the church representative, Monsignor Morlock. Because of this, the family could not prove their claim. The Monsignor might just destroy the papers, and everything would go back to the church due to an older will that was properly written down. In this situation, things had taken a turn for the worse. Maryann McManus had everything that the Monsignor usually would have taken from the bishop's safe while the family was busy with the funeral. "I think she knew what was inside and reached the safe before we did," the Monsignor said. "And she also grabbed our file. Can you remind me why we moved it in the first place?" "We heard that Father Estes, who used to work in our legal office, told someone in a support group about that file. Our lawyers told us that if we got a subpoena, we would have to hand over the files. But you can't give what you don't have. McManus had the file only until we could send it to Rome with a diplomatic courier. I had the combination to Tom's safe in case something happened to him so we could get his papers. That was the agreement we made with him," the man said, showing his anger. The Cardinal realized the mistake made by his usually trustworthy assistant. Their agreement with Bishop McManus had been in place for a long time. They chose to ignore his clear break of his promise to stay single in exchange for his wealth when he passed away. McManus had a lot of money from his family. However, most of the McManus estate came from the money he made while managing the properties owned by the church. It was a very important job and paid quite well. The bishop earned a simple salary as a church worker, but he got a much bigger paycheck and better benefits as the head of the church's real estate division. McManus was really good at managing church properties. He was the one who thought of the idea to announce closings of churches and schools ahead of time. This gave the local churches a chance to save their buildings. McManus started off with a strict approach, but later, with the help of the cardinal, he agreed to give them more time if they could gather enough money to fix up the property. If the church could not raise enough money for the needed repairs, McManus had made it clear that the property would be sold. All the money raised from the sale would go to the diocese. If the church group collected enough money to make the needed updates, they could sell the property a year or two later for a much better price. The church would not take a loss. At a time when the church mainly wanted money from its American groups, the McManus way of doing things was easily accepted across the American church. Still, Thomas McManus was not a bad person. He believed it was his job to get as much as he could for his church, and he thought it was fine to receive fair pay for himself. While he was alive, he made sure to take good care of his family. He sent his kids to the best Catholic universities. They had everything they needed within reason. He also took his wife on nice trips. They owned a condo in Fort Myers, Florida. He made sure Maryann was well-dressed, although in a way that was suitable for her role. He understood that the cardinal, his boss for many years, would take care of his family after he was gone. They had decided that most of the McManus estate would go to the church. Clearly, Tom had not shared this with the woman who had been his wife for many years. The fact that he had to make papers to secure a claim in Mary McManus showed just how much a woman could influence a man. The calm in the McManus home came from empty promises. It was a trick the church had used for many years. They usually won. But sometimes a Maryann McManus would show up. I feel awful. I disappointed you and Tom McManus. I just can't believe that woman won against me, the man said sadly. We didn't take her seriously enough. We can't let that happen again. We need to get that file back, no matter what. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, Your Honor, the Monsignor replied. But what if I can't? Then I hope you'll do what is necessary, the Cardinal said, leaving it at that. The Monsignor looked worried. Explain to me why you want to work for the U.S. Attorney, besides the clear opportunity for advancement, Jake Greenwald asked. He was of average height, losing hair early, and had a thin frame, even though he carried a bit too much weight and wasn't very fit. Linda Siegel kept smiling as she thought back to the interview with this serious man. She didn't see her move from the Westchester District Attorney's Office to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District as an improvement. It wasn't going as she had hoped. Her dream of being a hero prosecutor was fading. The Westchester District Attorney's Office was known for helping its workers move up to better positions. Women had been doing great there for many years. I'm looking for new challenges. I don't want to be stuck in criminal law, she said confidently, ready for the question. The true reason for her change wasn't something that would help her get the job. She was nervous, unable to move forward on a case, all because she had almost sent an innocent woman to jail for murder. Since that day, she had opened up a troubling book filled with notes from Stephen Fitzgerald's trial. Now, she struggled to take action without doubting her choices. Linda had always fought hard in her job. She was an attorney who played to win and never backed down. She was Might Mouse, a defender of what was right and fair, and this was her current problem. She had gotten her Might Mouse nickname for a reason. Like the cartoon hero, she viewed herself as a champion. She had always believed in her own strength and abilities without doubt. But now, that self-assurance was shaken. Two women had tricked her, and they weren't even teaming up. The wife who felt hurt tore up her husband's note where he talked about ending his life. She wanted to keep hidden the truth about his secret past. The girlfriend was ready to give up $2 million because she thought it would be fair for her boyfriend. These two women cared for the same man, but in the end, he let them both down. Who would have thought that? But Stephen Fitzgerald had understood all along. It wasn't just a guess or something a lawyer said because of how much he was paid. It was a special feeling that set apart the good from the great. Deputy U.S. Attorney Jake Greenwald couldn't resist taking a chance with the small but talented lawyer who had a strong name in trials. "You're not still upset about losing the Wheatmore case, are you?" Jake didn't see himself as a lawyer in the courtroom. He considered himself more of the office's organizer. It was common knowledge that the U.S. Attorney wanted to strengthen the trial team. Jake's job was to find people with the right skills to fill positions. A woman came to him with a strong reputation and support from powerful people. However, the Wheatmore trial had ended badly, and she was not from a top university like the other candidates. "No, I accept the jury's decision," she replied in the same dull way she had been saying since she started looking through her notebook. She had no other choice because she had learned things in a wrong way. She had promised to keep the truth hidden. The woman she had accused was really innocent. "Don't worry too much. Bad people like Fitzgerald always get found out for who they really are," Jake said. He only had 6 weeks to get ready, but he understood the case better than I did. I was in a good place and had a judge who liked me, yet he still won over the jury. He did a better job. "It's really that simple," she said clearly. Jake began to think that this woman might be just what the boss wants. "You know the job you applied for is in the civil division, but it also deals with white-collar crime. Our office doesn't have a good record with financial cases," he explained. Linda wasn't worried about the white-collar cases. For her, it wasn't about what happened, but about how to understand the situation. It was exactly what she needed, simple and straightforward, with no hard choices to make about right or wrong. She could do her job feeling good about it, and this was a great chance for her to move up. The phrase, "not great," really meant bad. "This is just what I want, a new challenge," she said. Linda didn't mention that it also meant she wouldn't have to see Stephen again, which helped her avoid any trouble. Their relationship had grown stronger after their first intimate moment. Linda had never met a man like him. She was not the type to be in a serious relationship. The longest she had been with someone before was just 2 weeks. Casual encounters were what she did best. Sometimes long weekends felt too long for her. She often reminded herself that she was focused on her career. She thought there was no room in her life for lasting relationships. But after being with Stephen, she began to question that. The truth often troubled her during the quiet nights. She often felt that no man could truly care for her beyond physical attraction. Whenever a man showed less interest, she would quickly leave. But with Stephen, it was different. From the very first moment she saw him, she felt a special connection. He sat alone in the courtroom, waiting for the judge, and his presence seemed to fill the space around him. She didn't believe in love at first sight. There was something deeper between them. They shared a common interest that brought them closer together. They were both trial lawyers. This job took up a lot of time in her life, and he was the same. She loved Sinatra's music. She collected his old records, CDs, and movies. Her friends thought it was odd. Stephen didn't mind. He would sit with her and enjoy the music, too. Their moments together were special. What they shared outside the bedroom felt even more enjoyable. This was the first time she remembered feeling close to a man in such a nice and cozy way. He could simply be with her. It was a fresh and surprising feeling to have a man in her life. But he wasn't really hers. After all, he was married. His wife was both charming and wealthy. Still, Linda, the young prosecutor, held on to hope. His wife might have all the qualities Linda felt she didn't, but she had one big flaw. His wife was open and unapologetic about being unfaithful. This made Linda angry for 2 reasons. First, it was hard to believe that such a terrible woman could have the man who should be hers, and that Susan Fitzgerald could treat her amazing Stephen with such disrespect. Linda and Stephen had to put in effort to be together. They lived quite far from each other, and if she took the new job, she would be moving even farther away. But so far, they had found ways to see each other 2 or 3 times a week. This made their time together feel really special. She hoped they could keep seeing each other when she started at the new job in the U.S. Attorney's office. She knew she would be busy trying to get used to her new work. She planned to move to an apartment closer to the city, but still near the highway. She had everything figured out, and it felt like it would only be a short time until he moved on from what she called the bitch. For the first time, Linda allowed herself to dream as a woman in love. She was waiting and changing jobs. Stephen Fitzgerald sat in his new office at Rosewood and Associates, a law firm. It wasn't the biggest office, or even the second biggest, but it was still nice for his new role as a full partner. This was announced at the firm's partners meeting in January. He had avoided the titles of senior associate and junior partner because they wanted his well-known name on the office door. Many partners and lawyer friends were working hard to use his name to bring in more clients for the firm. In law, it's well known that trials can get attention, but they don't bring in money. The real profits come from making deals. Good criminal lawyers earn their keep by working out plea deals, while personal injury lawyers focus on getting settlements. In all these cases, Stephen Fitzgerald didn't help at all. He was even less helpful when it came to keeping clients happy, which was important for charging them more money. Since there were no cases that would likely go to court, Stephen had very little to do. He felt like a show horse, brought out only now and then to impress clients. Stephen was feeling bored and lonely in his new office. Before he had success in the courtroom, not many of the lawyers at the firm talked to him. Now that he was a partner, the other staff seemed nervous or resentful, which kept them away from him. The people who got the extra money were pleased, but it didn't really change how the workers felt at the firm. "You have a call on line 3 from Jason Applewood. He says he went to school with you," said Patty Stanton. She was Stephen's new assistant and didn't seem too happy in her job. Stephen thought Patty must be feeling just as bored as he was. That's probably why she connected the call so quickly. He couldn't recall anyone named Applewood from his time in law school or college. He knew a few people named Jason, but thought neither would be calling him. "Hello, this is Stephen Fitzgerald," he said. "Hi." There was a pause. I knew about you when you were at St. Ignatius," Jason managed to say. A cold shiver ran down Stephen's back, and he could almost predict what Jason would say next. "I'm calling about Father Danbury," the stranger Jason said, suddenly feeling very important to Stephen Fitzgerald. Stephen steadied himself and switched to his lawyer mindset, his mind racing with thoughts. "Where are you calling from?" he asked more firmly than gently. "I'm in Albany. I took an early train this morning. I could come to your office and—" "Where in Albany are you?" "Actually, I'm still at the train station. I think it's called Rensselaer. Take a taxi to the corner of State and Eagle. There's a sandwich shop 1 block east on Eagle. I will meet you there. I'll be in the back." 20 minutes later, Jason Applewood entered the small sandwich shop. It was a budget-friendly place, but it tried to look fancy. You could find bean sprouts on many of the sandwiches. The menu above the counter showed a list of wraps. The dishes had names from different states and cities. An hour and a half before noon, the place was empty, except for a small lawyer sitting at the table in the back. Jason was a little taller than average. He was losing his hair, which made him look older than his 30-something years. He had worn his best gray suit for this day, but it was wrinkled from the trip north. He quickly spotted the person he was supposed to meet. Jason walked to the table in the back, feeling a bit nervous. He pulled out a chair and asked, "Can I sit here?" Stephen Fitzgerald nodded and waved his hand toward the chair. "Please sit down and let me know how I can help you." Stephen's friendly tone eased some of the worry Jason had. "I realize you don't really know me. I was in school years before you, but we both knew Ed Danbury," Jason said, looking for a reaction. "Why are you here to see me?" Applewood asked, glancing down at his hands resting on the small table. "I thought we could have a drink first, and then I could explain," he replied. "Okay, I'll get us something. What do you want?" Stephen asked. After a short wait, Stephen returned with a cup of tea for Applewood and a coffee for himself. As they enjoyed their warm drinks, Applewood shared his story of the hurt he experienced at the hands of Father Danbury and how it changed his life. It was a sad story about broken bonds and lost hopes. It felt like a tale that had been repeated too often. "You see, I need some peace. All the others do too, and we thought we would reach out to you because—" Jason stopped and looked directly at Fitzgerald. Stephen met his gaze, showing no sign of emotion or hesitation. He stayed quiet, waiting for the man to speak. Jason moved closer and said, "You were one of the ones hurt. We know this. We've looked into it. You were the last one he harmed. They caught him with you, and they couldn't hide it all because of the other boy, the one who fought him. You've built a strong name in the legal field, and we thought you could help get justice for the victims. We haven't seen any justice yet. Unlike in other places, there were no criminal charges and no money was given to help those affected. But now we are united and we feel, "What do you need from me?" Stephen asked. "You're a well-known lawyer. You could help us by starting a legal case." The reason there are no charges or cases in New York is that the time limit is very short. It is 3 years. If the person is under 18, the time starts counting from their 18th birthday. I'm 29 years old, and you mentioned that I am the last person affected in Danbury. The law that would help us ended 8 years ago. The state assembly tried 4 times to open the law again for 1 year, but the state senate did not want to talk about it. Also, the assembly members would not have voted for it if they believed the senators would say yes. The politicians do not want this to go to court. But that's the problem. We think we have a way to deal with the time limit for legal action. Can I ask who you are? We're the New York Alliance of Abuse Victims, NYASAV. We're a young group only 3 years old, but we think we've found some new proof. Proof of new crimes? No, a document about the old crimes. As I mentioned, the time, you don't get it. There was a secret plan. They worked together to... You want to show there's a plan to hurt kids? Stephen asked, raising an eyebrow. No, not to hurt them, but to hide what happened. Like I said, there's a file. It must be a big file. It is. It has names and dates, lawyers, police officers, prosecutors, and judges. A list of important state politicians. Do you have this file? No, we don't have it, but we know it is real. How do you know that? Someone we trust saw it. Is this person ready to speak about what is in the file and where it is? Well, he would have been. Would have been. The thing is, he passed away. He shared what he knew with one of our team members before he died. Father Estes was in a hospice. He recognized the nurse who was taking care of him from his time in the legal office of the church. He knew the nurse had suffered and asked for forgiveness before he passed away. He talked about the file and what it held. He focused on the attack by the priest, Danbury, and the later arrest of Patrick Sullivan. The police understood that the fight between Sullivan and Danbury was due to the attack. The lawyer planned to present a defense that explained Sullivan's actions. Sullivan had found out that Danbury was hurting you. I know what happened, and I saw what they did to Pat, Stephen said, starting to feel frustrated. But do you know how far they went to hide the truth? Many people were part of it. The police, the prosecutor's office, and the courts all worked together to keep this quiet, even the law firm that helped Sullivan. It's all written down in this file with names and dates, Jason said, sounding a bit desperate now. You think you can take legal action because of the conspiracy, but what was the last thing they did to keep it going? Father Estes said it's still happening. They are still hiding the truth. They still pay off police, lawyers, and judges. They've messed up the system. Well, I hope things go well for you. Please keep my name out of this, but thanks for the info, Stephen said as he got ready to stand up. Just then, Applewood reached over the table and grabbed Stephen's wrist to stop him from leaving. It was an instinctive move, but he realized right away that it was a mistake. Stephen froze. The unexpected touch brought back a memory that he had buried for a long time. The talk about Father Edward Danbury brought back memories that Stephen had tried hard to forget. Applewood's touch broke through a wall he had built around those thoughts. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, Jason stammered. Taking a deep breath, Stephen managed to steady himself and asked, Mr. Applewood, what do you want from me? I've dealt with what Father Danbury did. I've built my life not as someone hurt, but as someone who helps others. Can you tell me what this meeting is for? We, the members of New York ASAV, need your help to start a lawsuit and get access to this file. We need to make them give it to us. Surely you have other lawyers you can ask. No, and none that have your talent and good name. They will have to pay attention to you. They won't take me seriously when my only proof is what someone who has passed away said about something they read in that file. But nothing. It feels almost pointless, and I have more important things to do. My advice is, move on. If you give it a try, you can... I understand. Thank you for your time and the tea. Maybe I will do better with Mr. Sullivan. Stephen was about to leave, but when he heard that Applewood would reach out to Sullivan, he sat down again. Pat was just that kind of guy. Recently, he had done some things he wouldn't have done before. But Patrick Sullivan was still a kind man who would always help others in need. He often chose to do what was right, even if it hurt him. When he was just 12 years old, he stood up to Edward Danbury, who was much bigger and stronger than him. The struggle between Pat and the priest was a battle of strength versus willpower. The brave boy seemed to have succeeded and was taken into custody for his heroic deeds. Stephen believed that Pat would support the people in need. The new district attorney of Van Patten County would once again put everything on the line for what was right. Okay, I will help you, but I have 2 conditions. First, you and your friends should not talk to Pat Sullivan at all. Second, you need to follow my advice exactly. Sure, if that's what you want. Great, we have a deal, Stephen said as he reached out his hand. Jason Applewood shook Stephen's hand carefully, understanding that it was hard for him to touch anyone right now. What do we do next? Jason asked. You go home and tell your group to meet in a safe place. I will begin my work now. What will you do? You don't need to know right now, but you have to trust me. Just follow my instructions. Stephen took Applewood back to the train station and made sure he got on the first train to Manhattan. As he said goodbye to Jason Applewood, he felt a strange sense that a heavy weight was starting to lift from him. Defense lawyer and former special prosecutor Jimmy O'Reilly was reading the paper he had received from the governor of New York. The person who wrote it was truly skilled. In just 3 short pages, they explained a legal idea and how likely it was to succeed. Sadly, like many smart lawyers, he missed the big chance that came with failure and any results that went beyond the small issue of his case. The author had explained an idea for getting around the time limits set by law. This idea was based on the belief that if someone hid something on purpose, the time limit might not start until the harmful act was found out. In this situation, the issue wasn't the first attack, but rather the wrongful actions of those who tried to hide what happened to the victims. It was a complex legal discussion, and there were even stronger arguments against it. This could be a good case study for law students that would lead to an interesting ruling if the highest court looked at it. O'Reilly agreed with the final point made in the document. He didn't think the current law would help those who were hurt as kids. It seemed too late, and that's what the High Court would likely decide. The real issue was that, as the writer of the memo had pointed out, this case could go to trial before it got tossed out on appeal. It was a trial that would worry the public and make the government uneasy. O'Reilly could picture it clearly in his head. The lawyers for the plaintiff would start with many people to share their stories of terrible treatment and the pain that grew from it. Then, they would bring in the charming and successful Stephen Fitzgerald to answer questions. They would remind him of what he had said before, about how, when he was 11, he had been hurt badly while bringing a home-baked cake to the church office. The lawyer would then ask how the boy got away. He wanted to know how the boy's cries brought his friend to help him. They would describe the struggle between the 12-year-old Sullivan boy and the priest. In a moment of panic, Sullivan grabbed a heavy silver crucifix and swung it hard, knocking the priest out and hurting him badly. After that, the plaintiff's lawyers would pause. They would call Sullivan to the witness stand and start discussing the legal actions that came next. The kind man would be asked how people treated him for helping his friend. The jury would learn about the second wave of mistreatment the boys faced from the adults meant to keep them safe, like the police, lawyers, and judges. Any jury chosen would surely find those adults responsible. No matter what the final decision was, the damage to their reputations would be lasting, and it could lead to legal trouble because the laws would count from the last act of hiding the truth, the last payment made, and the last time someone tried to block justice. All it took for a big change in politics was clear evidence. The cardinal had told the governor that such proof could be out there. He said the church might have saved it for a time when it was really needed. The state's government was in danger, and O'Reilly, an outsider who didn't always follow the rules, was given the task to uncover the truth. He needed to see how far the trouble would reach and which powerful people might fall as a result. The cardinal's warning felt like a threat. Stay away, or there will be consequences. But what did "or else" mean? Was the governor involved? How deep did this problem go, and did O'Reilly truly want to find out? Was he really willing to stretch his morals this far? O'Reilly wasn't a beginner. He knew exactly where to begin, with the young person's criminal record, a record that was carefully hidden from anyone wanting to see what was inside. It took him 6 weeks to get the file from the Criminal Justice Office, with a lot of help from the governor's office. He was lucky because Sullivan, the person he was looking into, was being considered for the job of acting district attorney. It provided him with a solid story to hide what he was really looking into. The file he got was just 1 page, a form from the juvenile court. To someone who didn't know better, it seemed pointless. But to Jimmy O'Reilly, it told a story. The charge was minor compared to what happened, 3rd-degree assault. Judge Sarah Markham was a retired judge working temporarily. The prosecutor was a junior assistant district attorney, but the defense lawyer had a big reputation. Edward Kincaid's name showed up in the place where it should be, but it wasn't the current governor. It was Edward Kincaid Sr. He worked at Tallman, Blake, and Schumann TBS, as everyone called the firm, was a big law office that focused on real estate. People like him were usually not found in criminal courts. Edward Kincaid Sr. was in trouble, and now his son, Edward Kincaid Jr., had a problem to deal with. Everything else from the young person's record was gone. There were no statements from people who saw anything, no report from the investigation, and no check from social services. These things were either lost or never made, but Jimmy thought they were lost. Someone must have those papers. Maybe a church leader wants to use a secret about the governor's father to get what he wants. O'Reilly's secretary announced a call from Carrie Wilson. "How's my favorite special prosecutor today?" Carrie asked. "Depends on which prosecutor you mean," came the reply. "You're being silly. I just sent in the papers for your new job," she said. "What am I investigating now?" he asked. "The juvenile justice system," she answered. "So the governor saw the Sullivan case file?" Jimmy inquired. "Yes, and he's very upset," she confirmed. "Is it because he didn't know his father was involved?" Jimmy continued. "No, it's because he didn't know anything about it at all," Carrie said, her anger clear. "Are you sure?" he pressed. 100%, she insisted. "He knew nothing about this, or he would have done something sooner. You have to trust the man you work for." Jimmy couldn't trust people like Carrie could. They had been together for more than a year, but their relationship wasn't moving forward. Carrie was engaged to a man who was gay. He was using her to keep his secret and stay hidden with his boyfriend. Jimmy had a wife who was not around much and was not faithful to him. He didn't want to get a divorce because of their 2 young daughters. However, it was their different views on politics that created a bigger gap between them. Carrie was very loyal to her boss, the governor, and Jimmy couldn't bring himself to trust the governor. Maybe it was just his usual doubt, or perhaps it was something more, but Jimmy was a cautious and distrustful man. The case he was working on clearly led to the governor's dad, but it would also involve other important men. These were people who had a lot at stake. Jimmy could not bring himself to trust a politician. Governor Edward Kincaid was a politician all the time, and Attorney James O'Reilly always looked out for himself. "All right, I will stay hopeful until I can't anymore," Jimmy said to Carrie. "You need to believe in people, O'Reilly," she replied. But Jimmy couldn't shake off the thought of whether the young victims of abuse were ever told to believe. Susan Fitzgerald Singleton found herself in a tough spot. She had never thought about hiring a private investigator before, but she heard that Hartman and Hartman were the best. Her sister Mary, a well-known lawyer in New York, told her they were great. Susan thought that Mary was hiring the private investigator company to watch her wandering husband. Mary warned Susan not to take the company name too seriously. There was only one Hartman. "Teresa Hartman is the most ordinary person you'll ever see, but she's the best detective around," Mary said to Susan. Mary was right. Susan could trust her. The woman sitting at the big desk in front of Susan was short, maybe about 5 feet tall, but she held Susan's gaze straight on, even though Susan was 5'10". The chair she sat in was raised as high as it could go, and her high heels dangled just above the floor. "How can I help you, Ms.?" "Singleton," Teresa said. "My sister told me you are a detective who can work without being seen. My team and I are very careful. My husband is a lawyer, and he is also very sharp and observant. The last thing I want is for him to find out I'm having someone watch him. I can't promise anything, but we are very cautious. Still, it depends on what you want to know. I think he is being unfaithful." I need to know for sure, and if you can, how serious this is. Teresa Hartman thought about what was being asked. She was a calm woman who looked to be in her 50s. Her dark hair had some gray, and she didn't seem like someone you would think was a detective. What you want to know about your husband is not hard to find out. When it comes to how serious things are, I've found that it often depends more on the woman than the man. Is she looking for a lasting relationship or not? If she is, we will need to look into her too. No one had talked about money, and Teresa, knowing the woman's sister, felt it wasn't a big deal. Still, she said, "You may have to spend a lot. That doesn't matter. My husband is worth any amount. I won't lose him just to save some cash," Susan answered. Teresa smiled, seeing how alike the Singleton sisters were. Mary might be a lot older than Susan, but both women would really fight for their man. "Okay, I'll start right away," Teresa said. "Do you need anything from me? A picture, addresses, anything at all? If you have those, that would help a lot. But don't worry, I know who Stephen Fitzgerald is. By the end of today, I will find out where he is and who he is with." "What exactly are you suggesting, and when will you take action?" asked the upset man in the second row. The room was mostly filled with white faces, and there were just as many men as women. Stephen could tell that most of the women were there to support, not to complain. The small ballroom used to be a Holiday Inn, and it was now crowded with people. The place was now called Boulevard Inn, after it lost its franchise. About 200 people came to what was called a strategy meeting with the new lawyer. The meeting started with introductions. Stephen Fitzgerald was introduced as a lawyer and someone who had suffered abuse in his past. Some may have thought he would share a story of his experiences, but they were mistaken. Instead, he explained what people could look forward to in the meeting. The crowd did not like what they were hearing. "I just want to look into this more. And about suing, we can't think about that until we have a lot of proof. Right now, you just have an idea and no way to show it's true." People shouted, "What about the file? What file? The only proof you have is a statement from a man who is close to death." "That's not proof," Stephen said. He didn't want to say more because he felt sure there were spies in the crowd, and he was right. Besides Teresa Hartman, who had just let go of one of her best workers, and Tara O'Reilly, who was secretly part of their group, there were also spies from the church, the Vatican's ambassador, and a few worried politicians. A public meeting was not the right place to talk about what Stephen had found out. The file held important proof, and the church had lost track of it. James O'Reilly was already ahead of Stephen in the search for it. Stephen was trying to trick everyone and hoped that some of the watchers would not notice what he was doing. "Okay, lawyer, what do you suggest?" asked a woman in her 60s. She seemed to have a lot of power over the crowd because, when she stood up to speak, the angry murmurs from the audience stopped. Stephen stood up tall and looked at her with his bright blue eyes. "I think that if there is a file, it would only have things that can be found again, so I suggest that we look for proof of the plan you mentioned in the public records. If it's there, I will discover it. After all, I know better where to search. This is my story. It happened to me. I know what happened, when it happened, where it happened, and I think I know who was involved." The woman took a seat, and the audience quieted around her. Jason Applewood then led the meeting, which concluded with a decision to delay any more talk until next month. As the meeting ended, the older woman who had spoken approached Stephen to introduce herself. "My name is Silva Keenan. My son Jeff took his own life 3 years ago. He had a difficult life. After he passed away, I learned that he had faced abuse for 6 years as a child from 2 different priests. When I sought justice, I realized that in this state there was none for victims. That's when I helped start this group. I just want to say thank you for coming and for caring enough to say something different about your real plans," Sylvia said. Seeing Stephen frown, she added, "It's okay. You're good at telling stories. Most people believed you." But not everyone, Stephen thought, knowing that the fewer people he tricked, the less chance he had. On the other hand, Jimmy O'Reilly was not tricked at all. Tara's report made it clear to him that Fitzgerald was close behind him. Jimmy started his quest by writing down the names of important church leaders who, for different reasons, were no longer active. Most of these men had left their prestigious roles due to sickness or retirement. They had once been inside the church's inner circle but were now outside. Because of this, they could keep the church's secrets safe. Once he had a list of likely people, he began searching for the one who might explain the missing file. He first checked for any break-ins or robberies. This turned out to be unhelpful. Next, he searched for any recent deaths. There were many, but most of these men died in ways that did not lead to the church losing their things. However, he found two special cases that stood out. Monsignor Robert Montgomery passed away at a friend's house in Westchester County. This house belonged to a seemingly rich couple, and the neighbors were eager to share the stories that suggested the wife had been close to the Monsignor for a long time. A lot of women were interested in Randy Porter because Cecilia had her own partner living with her. "We didn't even know he was a priest until he died," said a housewife who lived nearby to Tara O'Reilly, the investigator sent to look into the situation. This meant that the husband or partner might have the file, but Jimmy thought that was not very likely. A better chance seemed to be at Bishop McManus's home. He had fallen ill and was now in the hospital. He was responsible for the properties of the diocese, which meant he worked with Edward Kincaid Sr., the lawyer for the diocese. Kincaid's firm took care of the Sullivan case, and Edward Sr. had signed the papers for the juvenile sentence. McManus passed away just a year after finding out he had cancer. He left behind a wife and kids who were in conflict with the church about the bishop's big estate. To be cautious, Jimmy decided he would talk to both Cecilia Porter and Maryann McManus. "I'm not quite sure what you mean, mister." "O'Reilly," Cecilia Porter hesitated. "I just wanted to know if Monsignor Montgomery gave you any papers. He lived here, and your neighbors told me that you and he were very good friends. Robert and I were very close friends, but you shouldn't listen to rumors. The nosy neighbors here like to spread stories that my home is a place for wild activities. I assure you, that is not true at all. I promise you, Robert was a priest who did not engage in romantic relationships." The dignified lady, over 60, was sitting in her own sitting room in a grand house from the mid-century period. She seemed credible, but the O'Reilly investigative agency had done a thorough background check. Cecilia Porter was not who she claimed to be. At the age of 17 in 1969, she married Randy Porter, who was also hoping to be an actor just like her. She was several months pregnant when they got married. Many thought Randy could not be the father of the baby because Cecilia was living with a wealthy man. However, Randy took action to prevent any clear proof of cheating, which was the only reason a couple could easily get a divorce in New York. Mrs. Rich wanted to end her marriage and hoped for a big payout. Her husband offered Randy a good amount of money to say he was responsible for the pregnancy. After experiencing a sad loss, the Porters decided to rent Cecilia's company to rich theater visitors. Even though neither of their acting careers took off, they did well with Cecilia as a companion and Randy as the supportive husband. As the new century began, Robert Montgomery came into their lives. Cecilia was getting too old for the major leagues, and the old priest wanted a peaceful place to retire. The Porters bought an expensive house in the nice Westchester suburb. Robert had a good income from a generous pension provided by the church. It wasn't clear what Robert did to earn such a big pension. What people did know was that he had been very close to the archbishop before the archbishop became a cardinal. The Porters and Montgomery had been in some type of connection in Westchester for about 15 years. "Mrs. Porter, I could take you in front of a grand jury and ask you about your relationship with Father Montgomery. But I don't want to do that. I'm just trying to find what I think are stolen government papers. I need to find the records for my job as the special prosecutor." "I promise we were just good friends," she replied. "But a grand jury might see it differently and charge you with something like prostitution. That's insane. I could never be found guilty of that." "Who mentioned anything about being guilty? You would just be put on trial, and that's your issue. No one wants those nosy neighbors to know the truth." Cecilia paused to think, then stood up. She came back with a big ledger book. "Here," she said coldly. "It's the only paper Robert left." O'Reilly examined the ledger. It showed an account that started with a big deposit but had slowly decreased over the years, finally closing 5 years ago. There were just 2 names listed, along with notes about dates and amounts paid. Also included were some bank account numbers and a routing number for the bank. He was looking for something, but whatever it was, he couldn't find it. Was there anything else? Maybe a file that someone picked up? he asked. "No, there's nothing. Can you please just leave me alone?" she replied. "Yes, thank you," he said, giving a small wave to the book on the table. It felt important to him. The hotel room was okay. The Midtown Marriott was big and busy, so Linda walked through the lobby into her room without anyone seeing her. Stephen had given her the room key when they met for lunch. It was nice not to have to take the train back to Westchester. The secret meeting in the city felt very exciting. He planned for tonight and tomorrow before going back north. They would take the train together to the Croton station where they had parked their cars. Stephen had a meeting about a new case. He would be late, but not too late, and they had planned for room service dinner around 9 o'clock. She bought a new outfit for the special day, a light pink teddy with white lace. When she got to her room, she took a shower. Afterward, she put on the teddy and did her makeup. She applied a little extra of her new perfume, Gabrielle by Chanel. Then she turned on the TV to watch CNN and lay down on the bed to wait. She must have dozed off. When she woke up, he was gently kissing her lips. His hands were softly moving over her. He was bare, and his warm skin smelled like the nice soap from the hotel. "Wake up, sleepyhead. It's almost time for dinner, and I want to be close to you before we eat," he said. "Isn't a girl supposed to have dinner first?" she replied. "Not when she makes it so easy for me to notice her," he said with a grin. She reached out and touched him gently, saying, "Well, I think I deserve a little something first," as she leaned in closer. He gently turned her around so they could be close to each other. Soon she was calling out for him to let her feel good. He held her legs gently with his arms, while his mouth focused on her. Just as she got very close to feeling her best, he would pull back a little. She tried to keep touching him with her mouth, but he moved out of her reach. When she was feeling very excited, he suddenly stopped. He flipped her over onto her stomach and got closer to her. He moved quickly and passionately until they both felt a wave of joy. Half an hour later, she was hiding in the bathroom while he put on a robe and let room service in. Teresa Hartman saw the cart roll in, and she knew there was dinner for two on it. But since she had followed Stephen from his meeting, she missed Linda coming to the room. Teresa couldn't stay in the hallway all night, but she had an idea. She could set up a small camera in the hallway to record what happened next. She planned to take it back in the morning and watch who went in and out of Stephen's hotel room. Stephen was not as hard to follow as she thought he would be, but watching him was still tough. She noticed at least 2 other people watching him as well. She had to make sure she wasn't seen by Stephen or by the other watchers. She didn't know who else was following, but the meeting she watched him leave gave her some hints. In the hotel room, Stephen was watching Linda enjoy her steak. "What? You've never seen a woman eat before?" she asked. "I've never seen a woman eat like you," he responded. "Well, after what you did earlier, I'm really hungry," she said. After a moment, she set down her fork and added, "I guess your wife eats very little." "Actually, a sparrow eats a lot for its size every day. You understand her better than Susan does, but you're on the right track. I bet Susan is carefully counting every calorie while she eats. But why are we discussing her?" "Because she is the big issue we're avoiding," Linda replied, sipping her very good Shiraz and smiling because he remembered she liked it. "Now you're calling my wife a big animal," he laughed. She tossed her napkin at him. "Don't avoid the question. I need a clear answer from you, or you might be in trouble." "Yes, Your Honor. My wife is very pretty and knows it. She really likes how she looks. Is she prettier than you? Why ask a question if you already know the answer? That's not the real question we need to talk about. What I need you to explain is why you are here with me," she said, her tone serious. He paused for a moment before replying, "Linda, I'm here because I choose to be. Can we just stop here for now?" "Yes," she replied, reaching across the table to hold his hand. Susan Singleton was staying the night with her friend Laura Sullivan. If Laura's husband had his way, she would soon be Mr. Sullivan's ex-wife. "I still can't believe he kicked you out," Susan said to her friend. "It's been 3 months. He gave me the divorce papers 3 weeks ago. Can't you fight it? It seems silly to get divorced over that. You worked late with your boss to get a better job. It didn't matter at all. You're not the first or last woman to make a choice to get ahead. I just wish I knew how he found out. He must have known before I was with Frank. He played his game perfectly. He tricked me so well. I still can't believe it. I thought my husband was the one person I could trust. How could he set Frank up for a DWI charge and use his job to pressure him? It was an easy plan. Pat started talking to Laura's boyfriend, Frank Patterson, at a bar after one of Frank's business meetings for connections. Frank had already enjoyed a few drinks, not knowing that someone working with Pat had tampered with them. Frank thought he was having a talk meant to calm an angry husband, so he drank more. When he finally got into his car and started driving, he barely made it to the highway before a sheriff's deputy stopped him right at the edge of Van Patten County. They took him straight to the town court, where he found a familiar face, the well-known defense lawyer, Stephen Fitzgerald. Frank had 2 past charges related to drinking. The third issue was a serious crime that also meant losing his job as a lawyer. Frank was vulnerable to threats, and Patrick had made the man who had won over his wife pay dearly. But what he did to Laura was far worse. Patrick came home with a divorce paper and insisted that she sign it immediately if she wanted to protect her partner. He wouldn't listen to any of her reasons or hear that her affairs had only happened 3 times before she stopped seeing that person. In the end, Laura gave in and signed the paper. She felt trapped, but she really believed that Pat would cool off and they would make up in time. She was worried about her job because Frank was very angry and wanted to get back at her. Only Saul Solomon, the head of the company, helped her keep her job. Now, she was working hard to save her marriage and help her husband find peace. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was the reason her dear husband had wandered off track. I don't want to think this way, but it seems like your Pat had some help. Stephen would do anything for Patrick, and he was right there at the court when they brought Frank in, Susan said. She understood her husband and his strong loyalty to his friend, Patrick Sullivan. It was surprising that Pat had done something so wrong, but Stephen didn't seem to care about right or wrong at all. Susan started to notice that her husband often thought that when it was for a good reason, the result made the actions okay. Saul says the judge will want counseling, and we can choose a counselor who has done well with cases like ours, Laura said. I think all of this is not needed. A woman isn't something to be controlled. It's not like you would get pregnant with Frank. I assume you took steps to be safe. Your husband is not being fair to himself or anyone else. He needs help, but it's not the kind that fixes marriages. I get that things are different now, Susan, but Pat holds on to old ideas about love. I should have talked to him about it sooner. I believe if I had more time, I could have helped him see things my way for my job. I wish things could change, but they just won't. If only Patrick could be as caring as Stephen. We'll find out how caring Stephen is once I get a reply from the investigator, Susan replied. I can't believe you are tracking him. Believe it! It's not that I don't trust him. It's her that I don't trust. What kind of woman goes after a man who is already married? Do you realize how unfair that sounds? Save that kind of talk for someone who will buy it. I know Stephen, and I care about him. I'm not perfect, but I understand men. Most men will go after any woman they can find, but not a man like Stephen. In some ways, he's a true romantic. Men like him can be easy targets. That's what I know as a skilled person in this game, but there are rules, and good married men are off limits, Susan said to her friend. Are you saying you never get involved with married men? Not on purpose. There are many who act like they are single. Sometimes mistakes can happen, but it's very clear that Stephen is married, as is your Pat. The men are clearly taken. It's like the difference between a pet dog and a wild wolf. You can tell just by looking. Still, with how you live, doesn't Stephen deserve to have some fun too? Laura asked. Now you're just being silly. Men like Stephen don't cheat for fun. Let me be clear. If Stephen is with another woman, he's being unfaithful, even if I've done something wrong. 2 wrongs don't make a right, but I haven't done anything wrong. Yes, I have crossed some tired old rules, but I have never meant to hurt my husband or take anything away from him. What I've been doing with Tony has just been some light fun. Stephen never had to worry about losing me, and I have always tried to put my husband first. Now that Mr. Greco is acting more possessive, I'm starting to pull back from him. The only reason I haven't ended things with him yet is because of my work with the governor. Otherwise, he would be gone by now. But what if Stephen says he's just having the same fun as you? With some girl who's playing with him like he's a toy. He's in trouble, and if he's too caught up to see it, then it's my job to set things right. Laura chuckled at the thought of a mad Susan telling her wandering husband what's what. Women like Susan always got what they wanted. Unfortunately, she couldn't treat her husband the same way. Pat had a strong temper. He could keep it in check, but it was hard to calm down. That was why he had planned to ruin her relationship and their marriage. Laura now saw her mistake clearly. She hadn't realized how far Pat's anger could push him. "I have a great detective looking into Stephen, and once I have all the information, I will do something about it," Susan said at the end. As for Stephen, he knew someone was keeping an eye on him. He didn't know all the people who were watching, but he was sure some were. He had noticed Tara O'Reilly at the Noyasav meeting, which meant Governor had Jimmy O'Reilly working there too. It was likely that other people were involved as well. That's why he had booked 2 rooms next to each other. One was in his own name, and the other was through his law firm. He had given the key to the room from the law firm to Linda. When she stepped out early Monday morning for work, he would have already gone the night before through the next room. Stephen Fitzgerald was going to be a tougher challenge than Teresa Hartman believed, but he wasn't impossible to reach. As for Tara O'Reilly, Stephen was already thinking about how she could help him find what he wanted and how he could use Jimmy O'Reilly to get ahead. He knew that Jimmy was probably already ahead of him in the search. Tony Gracio stood on the outside deck of the City Line bar. This bar got its name because it marked where Albany ended and Colony began. City Line was right across the street from the back entrance of the university. Once upon a time, this place was a college bar, but now the people here were older and dressed nicer. The outdoor area wasn't very busy on a cool September afternoon. It had a big TV where the Yankees were losing to the Red Sox. Tony was sitting with a beer and enjoying some buffalo wings. He felt lonely and sad about what was happening, but he needed to leave the office. It seemed like everyone knew Susan was staying away from him. His relationship with Susan was one of those things everyone seemed to know about, but no one talked about. That didn't make it any easier to be left. Being left was not something that happened to Tony. It certainly didn't happen after he had fallen in love. He was sure that was what he felt for Susan. Some people would say that Tony was infatuated with a beautiful woman who loved to show off. Susan's looks, popularity, and charm had been making men act foolish since she was just a teenager. Tony was just the most recent and perhaps the most foolish of her admirers. He realized he had made a mistake. Carrie had told him not to ask Susan to marry him, but he couldn't believe she would say no. Her husband seemed unimportant to Tony. In his eyes, he was hardly a real man. It was hard to believe that Susan would pick her husband over him, but that's exactly what happened. In a time when it was common for couples to split up and more people were getting divorced than married, Susan had told him that she believed in staying married until death. She didn't seem to value the part about not being with anyone else, but she held strong to the promise of marriage. She was clearly a bit unusual, and he should feel fortunate to have avoided her charm. Yet he couldn't imagine living the rest of his life without holding her close again. She drew him in so deeply that being away from her hurt. But the hardest part was knowing she was with that weak man, Fitzgerald. It felt like a punch to his pride, and he struggled to keep his anger in check. He sat back, sipping his beer as he watched the Yankees lose yet again, feeling both sad and angry. "Mind if I join you?" Tony turned his gaze from the game to see Frank Patterson sliding into a chair nearby. He didn't feel strongly about Frank. The man worked in politics and was known for being friendly and easy to get along with. Frank had a way with women. He could be quite charming around them. But when he was with men, he acted like a friendly guy. However, Tony saw through Frank's act. He knew Frank was not to be trusted. Frank would betray anyone if it meant he could gain something. Lately, he had been working as an advisor for the smaller group of lawmakers. These legislators already had their own legal advisors, and quite a few of them, too. The staff could not stop the shady deals that filled the pockets of lawmakers. Frank had 2 key traits for the job. He had dark skin and did not play by the rules. Because of this, a large part of the state projects was directed to his company. It wasn't the biggest share, which still belonged to the 3 top officials: the Speaker, the Senate Leader, and the Governor. The Governor was not taking his share of the money because he thought it was wrong to do so. Tony saw this as a waste. Because of this, there was more money for everyone else to take. Sometimes, Kincaid's sense of right and wrong clashed with Tony's way of doing things. It didn't make sense to let others take all the extra money. There was no way to stop it. Albany had always been about who could take what for themselves. Once Richard Croker had come up with the idea of honest graft, many started thinking about how to get a bigger piece of the pie. Politicians would face charges, but the United States still moved on. They continued to play the game, looking for ways to benefit themselves while pretending to serve the public. Croker believed that if you acted smart and took advantage of the system, you could win. This idea changed how people viewed politics. It became less about helping others and more about personal gain. Many followed this path, hoping to score big and enjoy the rewards. There were scandals and investigations, but they often led to nothing. The same politicians would rise to power again, always on the lookout for their next opportunity. This cycle kept repeating. The game of honest graft turned into a way for some to get rich while others watched with disappointment. In the end, Richard's idea affected many. It changed the rules and how politics worked. It made people wonder if anyone was truly looking out for their best interests or just trying to fill their own pockets. The Supreme Court would let them go free, since corruption is a big part of American politics. "Please, no talk about politics today," Tony said as Frank took a seat. "I promise not to," Frank answered. The two men sat for a bit, enjoying their beers and watching the game. Then Frank brought up the reason he had come to see Tony. "How are things with Mrs. Fitzgerald?" "What have you heard?" Tony replied, a bit more harshly than he meant to. "Only that she seems to have a very strong devotion to her marriage." Tony let out a quick laugh. "That's one way to say it. Can you tell me what you think is natural?" "There are many things like fire, floods, and sad accidents." Tony squinted and studied Frank Patterson closely. "What are you trying to say?" "That this world has many problems and we share something. And what would that be?" "A reason to want Stephen Fitzgerald out of it." To be continued. The storm is just starting, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us as we unravel the dark web that ties us all together. The truth is closer than ever. But are you ready to face it?